Okay, welcome to this meeting of the Ad-Hoc COVID-19 Subcommittee. This meeting is the first to be live streamed, so anyone can hear our discussions in real time, using what people in lockdown might want to do. This was publicised on the website, through social media, and also as a press release, because it marks another step forward in our Council's decision-making arrangements. This meeting is also being video recorded and will be posted on the website as soon as the recording is available. Nick, can you provide the centre on any apologies and substitutions, please, and advise which members are present at this meeting virtually via Teams?
Thank you, Chair. We've had no apologies for the meeting, and attending by Teams are Councillors Davidson, Councillor Ian Carruthers, Councillor Johnston, Councillor Maitland, and Councillor Wilson is actually physically present. Yeah. So, and in the room for the benefit of those viewing online are Councillor Murray, who's chairing the meeting, Councillors Thompson, Councillor Wilson, and Councillor Hislop. Covered everyone? Yeah. Thanks,
Nick. I confirm my agreement to the councillors named as being remote, as being able to participate remotely. Members joining us remotely should have regard to the good practice note and ensure they only activate their mics and cameras when they wish to speak. Those members should, if they can, use the chat facility to indicate a wish to speak, and Nick and I will maintain a list of speakers and call each of you in turn. Do any members have a declaration of interest that they wish to make? Okay. So we'll move on to agenda item 3, and these are the minutes of the meeting for the 24th of April at 10:30, and they are for approval. I know it was actually different. It weren't the same councillors that were present at them, so Stephen and I were happy to approve it.
Yeah, happy to approve that, yeah.
Okay, and item 4 was the minutes of the meeting of the 24th of April at 12 noon, and I wasn't present at that one, so I'll ask if those present would approve.
I don't see any issue.
Thank you. And agenda item 5 is the minutes of the subcommittee meeting of the 1st of May at 10:30. And yes, that was the second part of the licensing one. Okay, are we happy to read that? Those of us who are there? Yeah. We move on to item 6, which is the COVID-19 update. This is a standing item of the subcommittee whereby members are provided with a verbal update at every meeting on our council's response to the COVID-19 emergency. Now that the online members' briefings, the community newsletter and the daily briefings are established, this briefing focuses on the high-level issues that are coming forward rather than the information provision. Richard Reeves and Steve Rogers are present. They're not on Teams, it says here they're on Teams, but I see them too, to provide the update to members. Hand over to you.
Thank you, Leader. Good morning, members. I'll start, if I may, and give you an update on the various cells aligned with the response, and then pass on to Steve to cover the economic recovery cell. In terms of the multi-agency local resilience partnership approach, the multi-agency meetings at both tactical and strategic level continue. They're on a weekly basis, as does engagement with the regional and national frameworks. The primary areas of attention currently and a focus for us over the past number of weeks have been in regard to shielding and at-risk groups, and indeed contact tracing, and I'll provide a bit more information in a second in regard to those areas for members. Another area of key focus for us has been that Police Scotland have highlighted an increase in reports of domestic incidents in recent weeks, and although there's been a slight decrease in the past week, that is something that's featuring every week on our tactical and strategic agendas, and our own public protection team colleagues are heavily involved in the response to that concern. In terms of test, trace, isolate and support, a rolling programme of key worker testing for those who are symptomatic at mobile sites is now underway. That provides coverage across the region. To date, the mobile locations have included Dumfries, Stranraer, Langham, Sanker, Annan, Thornhill, Newton Stewart and Lockerbie. Yep, so that's where we are in terms of the contacts from individuals of Group 2, which is relatively low. And out of that 999,482 have required support, which is fulfilled by the community cell and the council's solutions centre. The only other comment on shielding is that there is a national evaluation and a revised national process that's being developed at the moment. So we'll update members as that evolves over the next week or two. A few other things, free school meals, we've got a total of 3,565 individuals who are eligible for free school meals. I can confirm that each and every one is receiving support either through the decision of this committee in terms of the agreed cash payments or the provision of the free school meal boxes, and in addition over 437 meals per day continuing to be provided through nursery and childcare settings across the region as well. Key worker childcare members is something that's taking a significant amount of time and resource and effort just now. There's a continuing upward trend in both key worker and vulnerable children childcare. 412 individuals are included in the key worker childcare and 63 vulnerable children in our childcare provision as of the 20th of May. This provision is being delivered right the way across the region. 12 schools are involved in the hubs, 30 childminders and 5 private providers at present. The modelling suggests the trend will continue to increase, and we know that as a consequence of the First Minister's announcement and roadmap yesterday, this will be an increasing area of focus for us over the next number of weeks, particularly as we plan for the summer holiday period, which we expect to be challenging. A couple of other stats and updates for you, Leader. An interesting registration since the start of the pandemic. We've registered 382 deaths, of which 47 have been COVID related. Of the 382, we've had 128 internments and 203 cremations. One of the interesting and I guess one of the things we will keep under review is the mortuary capacity. We talked to members previously about our planning for the worst case scenario, but hoping for the best. At the moment, our available mortuary capacity sits at 90%, so we're well prepared should there be an increase or a second spike in terms of the number of deaths. Community support continues to be first class across the region, predominantly targeting Group 3, those in financial hardship, and some of Group 2 as well. We had nearly 5,000 people receiving food support weekend in the 15th of May, with over 3,500 food parcels being delivered during that week. 254 volunteers assisting with food preparations and over 290 community groups that are involved in delivering those food parcels across the region and developing that service. So the partnership with the third sector has been first class in that regard, and we're currently doing an evaluation exercise in regard to the funding of those community food programmes, be they through national funding schemes or through the council's hardship fund support thus far, and we'll report that back to members when we've completed that exercise. Finally, Leader, I think a key focus for us over the next week will be to look at the published route map through and out of the crisis delivered by the First Minister yesterday. Clearly, any lifting of restrictions is premised on the review of medical and scientific evidence at that time, particularly the R number, which is currently estimated between 0.7 and 1 for Scotland and requires to consistently remain below 1 in order to successfully implement the phases of the roadmap that have been tabled. And I think that's obviously a critical point. However, most relevant for our council and our planning over the past week has been focusing on things like the reopening of household waste recycling centres, and plans are in place for that to be reopened from the 28th of May, 1st of June, apologies. Changes to guidance for schools, obviously, is forming a great deal of our discussions and debate at the senior leadership team at the moment, with the 11th of August as the key date in that regard, but planning for teachers and buildings to reopen in advance of that will require significant capacity and significant resource from the facilities management cell and the logistics cell in terms of PPE and cleaning, disinfection regimes, both initially and moving forward. The restart of face-to-face children's hearings and the restart of health and social care activities are also key issues for us that we're focusing on in terms of our resource in senior leadership team, and that will be a focus for us over the next week, Leader. That's an update from myself in terms of the response cell. I'm happy to either take questions now, Leader, or pass you to Steve and we can pick up questions at the end.
Take questions for you now and then on to Steve.
Yeah, thanks so much for that, Richard. You know, the briefings that we're getting on a daily basis are really useful to keep us up to date on sort of a lot of the issues as they progress from day to day. And thank you again for those and for the work that the staff are involved in. My question possibly could come in the next one, but you mentioned at the end there about particular schools and the route map that was published yesterday. And I think, first of all, I think there's a need for us to have a further discussion, but secondly, you know, a point of principle. I appreciate that yesterday, the sort of 11th of August was a sort of key day that was mentioned for schools going back, which obviously is not the date that we would have expected schools to go back. I'd be quite keen to know what discussions have been had, firstly in this local authority, but then also across Scotland, as to actually how much additional finance it may require to send schools back, on the basis that obviously teachers in their contracts are entitled to a certain number of weeks holiday, the fact that obviously we would need to look at bus contracts, we need to look at the wider school staff in terms of getting them back in. I'd be keen to know what discussion was had between COSLA and the Scottish Government and ADICE and the Scottish Government in that regard. And I think there's a point of principle here, because it's local authorities that employ teachers, it's local authorities that employ school staff, it's local authorities who run schools. And I think, you know, what was the point in our staff going through the whole consultation process with unions, with teachers, with parents, with wider school staff on when holidays would be, and doing a good bit of work and getting a broad support for that, if then actually that is all could be thrown in the air, and who knows what will happen. So I'd be quite keen to know about those issues, and what discussions have been had and what the initial thoughts are on that, because it is going to have major complications from what is already going to be a difficult task in trying to get staff and pupils back to school safely. And I think that, you know, there's a need for us as a council to consider what our position is, given that it could put a huge financial strain on what is going to be a very difficult time to come for the next couple of months and years.
Leader, thanks, Councillor Wilson. Obviously, really important, key and critical questions. Clearly, the information was presented yesterday is something that certainly the senior leadership team yesterday were discussing in detail. I know there is a forthcoming members seminar specific to education, and we talked at length yesterday about that being the forum where we would provide members with all of the information we possibly could in terms of a specific response to the education-related issues. We also all had a detailed discussion in regard to the sort of wraparound services. You mentioned transportation as being absolutely critical in those discussions, and as a leadership team, we are very clear that discussions involving both the logistics cell around PPE, cleaning, as well as transportation, have to be aligned with the whole restart of education in that process. So, not at liberty to able to answer all the questions now, but I can give you assurances that they are under consideration by the Director of Skills Education and Learning and the senior leadership team, and we'll pick that up as part of the members' seminar on education.
Thank you, Leader. I think the key for members to understand is that the First Minister has acknowledged in her statement that there will be costs, particularly in relation to transportation, catering and teachers, where you magic them from. The problem, and I'll be very frank, I think COSLA made an enormous strategic mistake at its last meeting. I didn't think members realised how quickly the announcement would be made at COSLA, and I know that Councillor Davidson was expressing similar concern. And the reason I would say that the mistake is that, yes, we accept local responsibility for schools, but 32 different delivery models are not going to be fully funded, because we're going to have to justify why our model is different to Inverclyde's, is different to Glasgow's. And we've put ourselves in a position where we carry all the accountability, responsibility, but with no financial agreement at the front end. And what we were discussing immediately before, and apologies, I was wandering around with the earphones in, is exactly the point you made, that we're going to be gathering costs after we've incurred them in relation to 32 different models. And the history of a successful outcome for small rural councils or large rural councils is not good, particularly around that. And I think that in my view, yes, we wanted to be in control of the aspects of local delivery, but the framework is so broad, I think we're going to have a really difficult position. We're going to have to do it, but I can't see that any council will come out happy of the funding settlement at the end. I know the government, that's why I think the government wanted a national strategic approach that actually said you will do X, because that would be easier to fund. At the moment, we've all agreed to go out, develop 32 different models of delivery, and then expect to be able to justify why the recent Gallery's model is different to South Ayrshire model, more expensive or less expensive, and they'll pay. So I think it's a piece of work we said needs to rapidly be done, particularly through ADES with COSLA, on trying to get basic principles of understanding around, so that we're not actually having a postcode lottery, both of educational delivery but of educational cost. Because again, you saw at the COSLA meeting, there's starting to be a split around the distribution model in relation to COVID. So I think that's what we asked for this morning. Then we'll come back, and I think we should be in a better position to give more robust information to members. But it's a significant risk that we could put in a model that we then justify, perhaps only get 80 pence in the pound back at the back end of it. But the commitment's there to fund. But I don't know how you'll get a funding model that goes over 32 different delivery models that are so broad and vague under the framework. So just to share that with you, it was a real concern of our meeting this morning, that we absolutely need to understand what 32 of us intend to do around this, so we're in the strongest position before August.
Yeah, just if you don't mind, I'll come back. I appreciate your frankness, particularly around COSLA's position, and that is useful to know and useful for you to share. I think certainly, at the front page of the national papers today, stating us and a number of other local authorities that would be at significant financial risk, and I think whether we go back to school on the day that we were expecting or back on the 11th, it is going to cost us a significant amount of money to get that on track. Now, not that I'm complaining about that in itself, because I think that the more money we put into education, the better. But we're going to have a number of competing priorities on us as a council. We have a duty to our staff to protect them as much as possible in terms of the financial pressure that we're going to have over the coming years. And I think that we need to do everything that we can to make sure that we are not at a huge financial loss for the sake of just making sure that everybody goes back to school on the one day. We must do it as sensibly and as cost effective as possible, because we want to make sure that we have the finances in the coming months and years to make sure that we can continue to fund services as much as possible, to fund economic recovery, to fund educational recovery. And I would appreciate that bit of work that you've alluded to being done as quickly as possible, being shared with members as quickly as possible, so we can fully understand what that position is going to be.
There's also the cost of the childcare over the summer, because teachers will get holidays, and that's a significant issue. Councillor Scobie. Billy?
Yeah, I'm just working these buttons, Elaine. Thanks very much, Leader. Just three questions really. I'll start with the one Adam was talking there about education, and Gavin came in and thank him for his frankness. He came in on the model of delivery. Obviously, schools are going to, could return on the 11th of August as is indicated, and I don't know if we'll be returning as normal. But one of the questions that was asked to me was, do we return as normal, i.e. the period week, or if schools that were in this transformation before COVID that were moving to, I think it was a 33-hour week, will they be able to develop that in the period from June up to August, or is this something that's going to be put on them? The other couple of issues is for Richard. Richard referred to the police reporting increase on domestic incidents. I asked yesterday about antisocial behaviour and whether there's any indication of an increase in antisocial behaviour and how we are dealing with this in terms of the lockdown and the RSLs maybe not being able to get out there and try and resolve some of the difficulties. I raised this in terms of the mental health this causes to people that's affected by this, and in particular to this week as it's Mental Health Week, that we recognise this and find a way of dealing with antisocial behaviour as well as the domestic incidents. And then lastly is the TTIS and whether we've got a handle on the number of testing in the region, not just nationally, but in the region, and whether we could have a weekly update or whatever on how the numbers are increasing on testing. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you, Leader. Through you, in terms of question one on education, again, I know that was one of the matters that's currently under consideration by Gillian and the team, and I'm sure will be fed back as part of the process as soon as possible, as Councillor Wilson has requested. Antisocial behaviour, yes, we get an update at the Resilience Partnerships weekly. There have been some minor examples, I think, where the police have had to deal and act as they have done swiftly and appropriately to deal with those issues. Not, thankfully, a significant number. And in terms of testing, Councillor Scobie, that's a question that I've asked of our public health colleagues yesterday, and I'm assured that I'll get an update on the strategic meeting this afternoon, and with colleagues' approval, I will gladly circulate that information to members.
Could I come back again on what Richard just says there as minor examples? Just this week, we have had two very serious incidents of stabbing in the ward, Stranraer and Patrick. So, there are other issues in terms of people reporting locally. At least I've had a number of them reporting antisocial behaviour, and I think we do need to get a way of dealing with this issue. And if Richard could, I spoke to Derek last night, but if Richard could take that away and see how we deal with antisocial behaviour, because people living already in lockdown and then having to face or struggle with antisocial behaviour, it has got a devastating effect on their mental health. So I'd ask Richard to look at that along with the domestic violence incidents.
Ira.
It was with regard to the 32 different solutions. On one hand, we're saying that COSLA's went out, it was 32 different ideas. The government's saying no, they want strategic, yet within their route map out, quite clearly states of the regional variations. Now, you can't accept one thing and then dictate another, because it's confusing to local people. So what is the case, or is it just that, because if we come out earlier in certain phases than other councils, does that mean to say we'll have different costs and we'll have different ways of doing that than what other councils would? So you'd have to accept that there should be a regional variation.
It won't even be sub-regional leader if I can come in. I think that's a very very astute analysis, Councillor Hislop, that we start from a good position, which was a bad position 12 months ago by having excess school estate. So if you're a Falkirk, and that's the example I used this morning, if you're a Falkirk where your capacity is already over 100% because you're all PPP, then how do you even split it into two, never mind 3 or 4? So they'll have exceptional costs. They'll have to take over other buildings. They'll have to, and of course the health and safety requirements are significantly different as you dedicate school. So it's just the challenge for the government, and we accept that we're going to go into depression. There's going to be very tight money. It's how we're going to judge 32 different models on the basis of something that could dramatically change as we move through phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3. So it's a challenge, but actually it's a challenge that would have been better if we'd identified a model or a framework, because a lot of councils will do things because members want additionality into it. And then, so you just, I think from experience, we know that is not the best way to start it, and therefore I would have preferred COSLA having the working group we talked about, having another couple of meetings to get not just the framework agreed, but a basic parameters around the model of cost. Because if we'd done another week or so's work, I think we could have been in a much better position to say, don't go and spend a multi-million pounds on it. These are the parameters of different classifications. We're already grouped into family groups, ourselves, Aberdeenshire, Argyll, that are all going to have similar delivery models. So I think if we'd done a bit more work, we wouldn't have had an announcement, and now I'll be sitting with ourselves saying, and again, the model, depending upon where we are on the coronavirus curve, may well be different than the one we think we're going to do now when we get to July. We might have more opportunities, more flexibility. So again, you know, and I've always liked to start with a financial envelope that we're working in to then tailor it. And at the moment, we don't have that envelope. And again, I think for me that this conversation is bound to be repeating in 32 different councils as we speak. And that's not what I hoped COSLA would get us to, the point that we had a framework, an overall model, an expectation that there might be this amount available, and we start from that position and coordinate through our finance directors, but that's not where we are. So, but I think we rapidly will need to get there before the middle of June.
Thanks.
Councillor Davidson.
Thanks, Leader. Good morning. So yes, Gavin's covered a couple of things that I was going to say. I mean, I think it bears emphasising again that what we're about to attempt for this has never been done before. You know, there isn't a manual that we can turn to that's going to give us all the answers. And we don't know how the virus is going to respond over the next couple of phases of relaxation of restrictions in any case. So it's with that in mind, and the fact that there's bound to be a significant degree of uncertainty in all of this for some time, apart from the date that has been the subject of a great deal of discussion. What is the process going to be for us to keep up to speed with that and follow our officers' thinking as it's developed in terms of how this is going to work around the 1st of August, if it's going to be the 1st of August for everybody, and the pressures that's going to put on our finances? I recognise it's going to be a moving feast, I think, to put it mildly, but it strikes me that it's going to be critical that we have a grasp of those considerations and how they're developing and how that thinking is developing. I guess as an aside, what I would also say is that what was announced today didn't, or announced yesterday, didn't necessarily bear as much resemblance to the paper that went to COSLA leaders as might have been expected. I think that it was something of a surprise to most people. It is my view that there is a disconnect between COSLA officers and their discussions and civil servants, or vice versa, or both. And I think that's something that we also need to keep a close eye on, because clearly that any difficulties in communication at this point, given that everything is moving so quickly, and as I say, we don't have a primer or manual for any of this, is going to be a real issue and a real concern for us. But any clarification on how we're going to track thinking through on this and and how that's being developed, I think would be really useful. Thank you.
I think absolutely. I think part of our work over the next week, rapid work, will be to identify that unit cost base, because even within the model there may well be local variations that will need to cost in. So I think we need to establish a position so that when members, and again it's coming up later paper, wish to then debate it, scrutinise it, we're able to say that if we did that it would be an extra. If we didn't do that, it would be an extra, because I think you'll need that level given the significant financial commitment as soon as members agree the go button. So I think for us it would be about costing. If we put on an extra X buses, if we put on or withdrew, these would be the difference in your overall financial commitment. So I think that's the type of work that we will work on next week to try and get that unit cost basis, so that members ask, if I needed an extra 5 teachers in, if I wish to put an extra teacher into the small primaries, or an extra catering staff, or if we don't, etc., you're able to have that nuance model sitting in front of you, so we're able to, in meeting, come back to you, say it would be an extra £200,000 members, it would be an extra, rather than we go away for yet another meeting. We'd want to be in a position when members are taking those decisions to have that live model sitting in front of you.
Adam?
No, I think that's very useful. And, I do want to stress that, to me, it's not necessarily the money that we're putting into education, because, we don't have any issue with that. I think it's in the wider scale of things, we want to make sure that we make the right decisions now, as cost efficient as possible, so that actually in the long term we have that money available to ensure that, that there's job security for our staff, that we're able to put resources in where required in the terms of wider recovery. I think that Gavin's last point is very helpful, and I would maybe suggest that, I can't remember off the top of my head what the education seminar is.
28 is next Thursday.
But maybe that seminar next Thursday is maybe a good basis to actually make sure that the views of members can be taken into account in anticipation that, okay, the plans might not be ready for next Thursday, but certainly that those early views will be able to taken into account. But of course there will be variation across our local authority as well in terms of those schools that have got extra capacity. And I think that, obviously, I'm sure that all members are in agreement that we want to do whatever we can to make sure that as many kids are in school, as many kids have their education not impacted negatively as much as possible. So I would maybe suggest that seminar is a sort of first opportunity for elected members to sort of share their views, either sort of at the seminar or in our mechanism afterwards, so that we can sort of make sure that all those views are taken into account as early as possible, and that we can progress these plans and get them ready for sort of full council either in June or July.
Okay, just before we hand over, Richard, as somebody who was involved in registering a death 4 weeks ago, I can confirm that it was done extremely efficiently and very sensitively as well. So it was, well done, that system. I think probably worked even better than the original one when you actually went in and saw somebody.
Leader, thank you for that. And I can tell you that the registration staff in particular have done an amazing job, and it's been a very harrowing job, but also, as you can imagine, in the rawness of people being told that there's only, you can't go to funerals, they've been in the receiving end of what has been quite close at times to abuse. And therefore, I think again it just shows that right across the council, it has been trying, and particularly if you think about the shielding staff, they've been having conversations with people who are dying. And again, that's not when you join a call centre with the council you expect. So I think that those sort of comments, I think we need to start feeding back to those staff, because they've been working away tirelessly and in very difficult, particularly as most of our work has been around those really most vulnerable. And most of our people we've moved across have not had exposure to that working before as we've moved staff. So I think again that's a really helpful comment, but certainly having listened to a couple of those conversations, they have really been quite totally different to what has gone before. So I think somehow we've been able to recognise that staff have just gone and done it has been quite exceptional. And I think, thank you for those comments, and we'll make sure we get that back to service.
Hey, Steve.
Just very quick one. Thanks, Richard, for the presentation. On the number of school meals, what's been the change of those receiving the direct payment compared to the total figure as was before we took the decision to offer that?
Thanks, Councillor Thompson. At the moment, the split is around 2/3, 1/3. 2/3 are now moving to the cash payment and or voucher where they don't have a bank account, and a third are still on the free school meal boxes. However, there's a significant shift, and we're obviously only in the sort of week 2 of that process, so I think there will be more of a shift towards the payment than the actual meals itself. But we wanted to make sure at this stage, obviously, that everybody either got one or the other, which has been the focus. I can provide you with some more information.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Okay, Steve.
Okay, thank you, Leader. Yeah, I'd like to just give a brief update on the work of the Economic Recovery Cell, which for the last few weeks has remained really focused on the initial response in terms of distributing that government funding out to businesses essentially on an emergency basis. So I'll provide a quick update on where we are with that and some of the changes that have happened to that since we last discussed this at the members' seminar on the 30th of April. So in terms of the delivery of the Scottish Government property grants, we've now distributed over £33 million of aid to local businesses. We've paid out to over 3,000 local businesses and organisations so far. And that's out of our original allocation of 52 million. So we're about 60% of the way through that initial allocation. We've had 3,765 applications, and they're still coming in at a rate of something like 60 to 70 a day. So there is still a considerable workload being generated there, but we are managing to pay in the region of 77% of those within 10 days of receipt. We're paying 77% of the eligible applications that we get. In terms of some of the other updates, since the last time, we've now put in place an appeals process internally. We were asked to do that by the Cabinet Secretary, and we've now put that in place where we have an escalation route internally where applications or decisions that are disputed are reviewed by 3 independent senior managers. They've now dealt with 34 appeals to date. Other updates that have happened since we last spoke, we've now launched phase 2 of the property grant scheme, which as you'll recall, opened it up to multiple properties. So businesses that operate from chains or from multiple properties now became eligible. That opened up on the 5th of May. And also the scheme itself was expanded to include those businesses and organisations that are eligible for small business bonus but in fact receive charitable relief, and that started from the 11th of May. So again, that meant probably another couple of hundred local organisations and businesses became eligible. So the process of continual modification to that scheme continues. Now we feed back on a weekly basis to Scottish Government through the National Working Group, and through that group there are further changes that have been signalled to us. So we're anticipating, first of all, that the government is going to consider this issue about the landlord-tenant situation, where the tenants are not the business rate payers. So they have acknowledged that and they are addressing that. So we're expecting some announcements on that. They're also addressing some of the technical issues around ability to backdate the valuation roll to add new properties in that were not listed at the kind of cut-off date. So again, there's indication that there are further changes afoot to further open up that scheme. We've also started delivering the Self-Employed Hardship Fund. Since we last spoke, that was launched on the 30th of April. That has actually gone more slowly than we first anticipated. We've only had 168 applications for that fund. We've approved 98 of those, so we've distributed just under 200,000 from that fund. We've had to reject 50 applications, The main two reasons for those are that if you have been in receipt of universal credit, you're automatically disqualified from this fund. And the other issue has been that a number of people that have applied for the fund were actually trading before the 1st of April 2019, bearing in mind this fund is only to pick up those newly established self-employed traders that are not eligible for the big HMRC refund scheme that the government announced. So we have been feeding those issues back to Scottish Government, and experience from our contacts with other local authorities is very much the same. They're having the same issues in terms of the low level of take-up of this fund. The original allocation that we were given for that particular fund was just over 650,000, which would finance 326 grant awards. But we do understand that the government held some money back to be able to top that up if it was required. So that's where we are with the two main grant schemes that we're responsible for. Just moving on to the partnership working that we reported on last time, partnership working with South of Scotland Enterprise and Scottish Borders Council. You remember that we established a short life joint working group, and the focus there has been very much on coordinating our initial response to supporting local businesses, as well as sharing intelligence on the impact. And that's been very helpful in terms of establishing those kind of joint working relationships at an operational level. So we've now got to a situation where we have a data sharing agreement, where we have information on grants and grant awards being shared between the organisations, and we've also moved to having a shared customer relationship management system so that we're joined up in terms of our contact with businesses. So all of that has really been facilitated by the short life joint working arrangements that we've put in place. The agency itself has been delivering a couple of grant schemes on behalf of the Scottish Government. First of all, the Small Business Hardship Fund, which is targeted at tourism, creative and hospitality businesses. And in addition to that, they've been delivering what's called the Pivotal Enterprises Resilience Fund, which is a larger discretionary fund. Scottish Government announced earlier this week that the national funding for those two schemes was being significantly increased, and the national pot for those two funds is now sitting at 150 million. The Enterprise Agency estimates that their share of those national funds would approximate to around 6%, which would indicate probably availability of an additional £9 million of funding to be distributed to local businesses. We do understand that at the moment in excess of £2 million has been approved by the agency for local businesses, but we're continuing to get updates from them on those figures. It's worth noting that those initial arrangements were interim arrangements which were really put in place pending the establishment of the Regional Economic Partnership, which had previously been agreed by both councils and by government as being a model for strategic economic planning for the south of Scotland. And we'll bring a report on the further development of those arrangements to the next meeting of the subcommittee on the 12th of June in terms of the way forward towards establishing the Regional Economic Partnership, which clearly had to be put on hold once the pandemic outbreak occurred. Just moving on to the final area that I wanted to flag up to members, Leader, which is that Scottish Government itself has now set up its advisory group on economic recovery under the chairmanship of Benny Higgins, who's ex-Royal Bank of Scotland, and that group has now issued an open call for submissions of ideas, thoughts around economic recovery. It's likely that COSLA, Slade and the South of Scotland Strategic Group will all be submitting responses to that and will be contributing to those responses, but also I think we should consider submitting our own response as a council. There is a challenge in terms of the timescale, because this group is obviously having to work at pace in order to advise Scottish Government on its recovery plans, and has asked for submissions to be made to it by the end of May. So, Leader, if members were content for us to work up a draft of a response and perhaps to circulate that around the political groups before the end of next week, we could then meet that deadline. I'm happy, Leader, to take any questions on that update.
Is Councillor Maitland?
Thank you very much, Leader. It was simply a question about whether or not we intend to alert those businesses who are eligible but have not applied. I think previously you indicated that we would be doing that, but I'm not sure whether that is still the case. And also, could you just confirm, you were talking about the 6% of the fund that might be available to us, i.e. 9 million, and I think you said to local businesses. Is this across the whole of the south of Scotland, or is this simply Dumfries and Galloway? Thank you.
Steve?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Maitland. Yeah, certainly our intention at the appropriate time to do some proactive contacting of local businesses who perhaps have not yet come forward and applied for the main property scheme. We have to kind of get a bit of a balance between the capacity of the team to deal with the applications quickly. We have been engaging in some press and PR campaigns to raise awareness of it. We've been also working through organisations like the Chamber of Commerce and the Economic Leadership Group, but we'll reactivate that to make sure that local businesses, as many local businesses as possible, are coming forward and taking that scheme up. With regard to the 9 million that I mentioned, so this is the money that is coming to the enterprise agency for distribution through the 2 grant schemes that they're running, which are part of a national pot. So their estimate is that they are due to receive around 6% of that fund based on the number of businesses that we have in the south compared to the number that there are in Scotland as a whole. So we would anticipate that all 9 million would go to businesses across the whole of the south. So that's not just for D&G.
Councillor Davidson.
Thank you, Leader. Can I start by repeating my thanks to Steve and the team for the work they're still doing on processing grant support, feeding back issues and concerns to civil servants, and now starting to look ahead for what we do next. I mean, it's a huge amount of work, and if anything, it's going to get more complex as we start looking at restart and recovery. So I think it's really important just to, re-emphasise how much that is appreciated. Welcome Steve's update. I think Team South of Scotland has been a good way of sharing information on the emergency response, which has effectively been the provision of the grants that Steve outlined. I think it was important for us as a council to have a seat at the table and to start building a working relationship with the new agency. But I also think as we start working through restart and recovery, that kind of narrow group, which was necessary in an emergency phase, isn't going to be sufficient to make sure that we're all collectively making the right decisions. So I really think that it's critical that we move to establish the regional economic partnership that we had previously agreed that we would create. When we start talking about restart and recovery, we need business in the room. Otherwise, we can't be sure that we're going to be making the right decisions. So I'd really welcome the report that Steve is referring to. I have one question on the back of it. When we were considering the membership of the Regional Economic Partnership, understandably, we didn't have any reason to consider the need for public health involvement because we were looking at a regional economic partnership. But it's very clear that how we do restart and recovery is going to be driven by the public health assessment of what is safe to do and how we manage and suppress the virus. So can we give some consideration, please, in bringing that report forward when we're looking at the membership of the Regional Economic Partnership to the possibility of including a public health input? Because I think that I'm sure I can't possibly be alone in still not being very familiar with what the R number means and how it works, and what does 0.75 mean versus 0.9. I know that over 1 is bad, but other than that, I don't. And I do think that because this is such an unusual and strange set of circumstances, having that input into our considerations would be really important. So if we could give some thought to that, please, I think that would be very valuable. Thank you.
Yes, Leader, thank you. Thank you, Councillor Davidson, as well. I think that's a very good point in terms of because that provides the context within which that kind of strategic economic recovery work needs to sit. So we'll certainly be suggesting that in early course that there is information and possibly a presentation made on the health and public health context within which we are working to develop those economic recovery plans, because I think it is important that everybody engaged in that process understands how this needs to dovetail with those public health considerations.
Yeah. I wish somebody would explain to me how R is actually calculated. I haven't found anything predictable.
That's a whole seminar subject in itself.
Councillor Wilson, I'm aware that I should use people's titles because people might be listening in and not know who we're speaking to. So, Councillor Wilson.
And on the last point, you're a scientist, Leader, so if you can't get it, then it's not
It's just I've not seen an explanation that I can justify by the amount of testing, because I thought we would need to do more testing to be able to properly calculate. But
as a layperson, I agree with that. Thank you, Steve, for that really useful update, and to the wider team who are working at pace to do this. And unfortunately, I've come into the bridge on a couple of occasions over the last couple of weeks, and I've been able to have a chat with your team, and certainly pleased they're still in good spirits and have an awareness of the task that's going to be ahead of us. And obviously, the work that has been carried out so far has been incredibly difficult, but incredibly important in supporting the local economy and supporting our local businesses. But obviously, as we start to move into the reset and recovery phases, we're going to have to do a wee bit more work. And one of the issues that was sort of in the loop map yesterday was around changes to the way in which particularly the hospitality industry works, which is also a key sector of our economy and indeed a key sector in our town centres and high streets. And I think that poses a couple of issues for us as a council. Firstly, in terms of the capacity of licensing to deal with applications as quickly as possible for those businesses that may want to actually diversify, I think is the appropriate word, how we operate. But secondly as well, the sort of limitations as a region that we have, out with Dumfries and Stranraer, there isn't a huge number of town centres and high streets I can think of that are largely, have depedestrianised areas and would be, have the ability to, first of all, make sure that we can maintain social distancing, but also allow those town centres to allow those businesses to sort of open up with the actual premises. So I think that there's two issues there for us to examine very quickly. First of all, have we got the capacity in licensing, and if we have it, how do we make sure we have it to make sure that we can consider these applications as quickly as possible? And secondly, how can we work with local communities who may want to actually change what their town centre looks like in the short term to make sure they give the opportunity for businesses to diversify if they wish. One that springs to top of my mind is Langham, where a number of parking spaces, a section of the road could be closed in the short term to allow some local businesses to open up and to maintain social distancing, and that would be a huge opportunity for those businesses. And I'm sure that across our local communities we can think of other examples. Some of them relatively easy, such as in Moffat, but in other areas maybe some conversations that need to be had in communities. So, I mean, I would sort of request that we have a report back on those two issues, and certainly that we move at pace to get a sort of framework in place, or a mechanism in place to allow local communities and local businesses to sort of suggest to the council that, you know, we could shut this road to allow businesses to diversify and to allow for social distancing to be put in place, because I think that we all agree that those businesses that can get started up as quickly as possible are going to have the greatest chance of survival of this. And I think it's imperative on us as a council to do all we can to allow businesses to do what they need to do to survive. And of course, you know, I think there's a clear opportunity there in particularly some of our communities to shut roads if that's what it takes, and to depedestrianise huge areas in order to allow those businesses to diversify. And of course, have a really good impact on the environment and tackling climate change at the same time.
I think also that we probably need to look at some of our bylaws as well, because if, for example, restaurants wanted to be able to open up outside in some of our towns, the bylaws would actually prevent them from the sale of alcohol. So I think, you know, there's quite a few things that we need to look at in terms of that. Steve, have you?
Yes, Leader, thank you. And thanks for that contribution, Councillor Wilson. I think you've certainly highlighted really the shift that we're now going to be engaging with, which is the shift from the kind of initial emergency response to thinking more strategically really about how we can and should as a council be supporting that reset, restart and then recovery process. And I think the publication yesterday of the kind of 4-step plan really gives us a framework that we can now work to, because it starts to give us an idea of the sequencing of the opening up of businesses and some opportunity to think about how we need to coordinate, because I think that's the key thing. We need to pull together and coordinate our services. We've got a number of levers which we have control of effectively in terms of the environment that businesses operate in, whether that's licensing, whether it's roads, whether it's planning, whether it's environmental health, trading standards. All of these are things that we can pull together and really marshal in a way that is going to support the reopening of our economy. And as you say, town centres are probably a good example of that. So part of our thinking at the moment around developing recovery plans is that we do need to be looking at town centres, not just from the point of view of supporting businesses to start trading again and to reopen again, but also from the point of view of the safety of the public. Because if we don't put that message out there that actually it's safe to come into our town centre, we have addressed issues about social distancing, about signage, about controlling things. So if we don't do that, then people are going to be slow to start to venture back into what they now perceive as crowded and potentially dangerous places. So I think we've got to address both of those messages as we take forward a strategy for supporting particularly activity in and around town centres. And I certainly envisage that would be a component of, I think later on this morning's agenda, Leader, there's a separate report about the initial thinking around restart, reset, recovery, and certainly the restart and reset of the local economy and the way in which we as an organisation need to focus our resources on supporting that will feature not just in that report, but I think in the report that comes back to full council in June, because it will be integral to our whole restart plan.
Leader, may I just add to that, just in terms of to give members some assurances, there are already conversations in regard to with the workforce cell in terms of deployment of staff, where we acted very quickly and responsibly in regard to our response. There are already discussions now about licensing staff returning back to undertake some of those actions, Councillor.
I think just to add to that, you know, I really welcome, you know, that quick work in terms of considering how we go about this, and I think certainly either maybe in the next agenda, you know, to add a recommendation that we get that report back to encompass those issues, you know, because, you know, there is some easy examples where I think, you know, if we've got all the staff together, we can get on and you know, shut the roads and parking spaces and whatnot, make sure that we get those licence applications through as quickly as possible. But there are some communities where it will be difficult, but I'm sure there will still be a will from those communities to press ahead and support the local businesses. I think that, you know, the optimist in me points to both the Scottish and UK government proposals are going to encourage people to walk and cycle where possible. And, you know, I think that a good way to encourage that would be to see, you know, more of our happy streets to an extent being depedestrianised, to allow those to walk and cycle, and also, you know, make use of local businesses.
Councillor Scobie.
Takes a bit of time working these buttons, Elaine. Thanks again, leader. Just building on what Rob was saying about partnership working, and with an eye to across the water, we are partners in Northern Ireland and Mid and East Antrim Borough Council, where they see COVID-19 or the coming out of COVID-19 as an opportunity. And that opportunity is to look at the strategic infrastructure projects that could be coming out from national UK government. And that is on the 77, the A77 and the A75 links with our international port of Cairnryan. And it's not so much a question, leader, but it's more that I would hope that you, as the leader, the deputy leader and the chief executive could have delegated powers to act swiftly on anything that Mid and East Antrim Borough Council may be doing to make sure that we don't, or that we are ahead of the game, if nothing else, on some of these funding streams that could be coming out from national government. So that's a partnership working that could produce something positive for the restart and recovery of our economy, working off the back of our partners in Northern Ireland. So that's the only point I'm making that one. On the hardship fund that Steve alluded to, and people on universal credit or receiving payments are not eligible to the hardship fund, which is a rule with no discretion. If I just illustrate, and it's not the only case, because I've heard from speaking to an MSP of other cases, but a person applied before the hardship fund was available, got awarded universal credit of £10 per month, and then was ineligible for the hardship fund, which was, there's an unfairness within that system. And if Steve is doing anything in the government, then I think we've got to be looking at the universal people receiving universal payments and then being excluded or ineligible for the hardship fund. And lastly, it was just to the small business fund related to the tourist industry. And just to ask Steve, if we've got an oversight of this process in terms of how many people are eligible and how many are being paid out in bed and breakfasts or small businesses in the tourist industry, have we got a handle on that situation? Thanks, leader.
Yep, thank you, leader. Certainly, point that Councillor Scobie makes about the partnerships is well made, and we're open to working in partnership with anybody really that can add value to our efforts to rebuild our economy. And we have that existing relationship with Mid and East Antrim Council, and we'd certainly be looking to take that forward with them in the future. We're also, as you know, part of the Borderlands Partnership, and that's going to bring significant investment in the future into our region, and we will be part of the Regional Economic Partnership. So I think certainly we have to be fleet of foot enough to be able to work in partnership flexibly across the board to the benefit of the region. The The hardship fund issue that Councillor Scobie raises, this is really the main point that we have been feeding back to government. I think Willie used the term, it seems unfair. It does seem extremely unfair, and I think a number of our advisors have found it quite difficult dealing with these cases because it's quite clear that we want to help these folk, but that particular rule disqualifies them, and so we have been pushing back quite hard with Scottish Government to try to get them to revisit that one, even to the extent of introducing maybe an upper limit on universal credit. So if you had universal credit of above a certain amount, that would disqualify you. But as you say, some of the amounts that are awarded are really very small, and it does seem unfair that it disqualifies individuals from that fund. Lastly, with regard to the tourism sector, certainly within our own property grant scheme, we have that ability, and we have produced sectoral analysis of where those grants have gone. So I'll make sure that that sector analysis is distributed.
Thanks, Steve. Confirmed with Borderlands, they just met last week, and we agreed to write to the UK ministers with proposals as to how some of the funding could be accelerated, or some of the projects could be brought forward, with the aim of assisting us with economic recovery. That was obviously the case with us.
Particularly the place funds, leader, because that could fund the very things that members were asking about changes to the town centres. If actually those money could go in to do some of the enabling work to make it more attractive. I certainly see the opportunity for some of our areas to mirror France, etc., where your cafe brings it across the road, but that needs some infrastructure work. So again, it's joining those up through Steve's leadership. I think we could, but we need to identify the possibilities first, which is the thing the members are asking for first, and then the funding will subsequently be the second conversation.
Just on that point, if you're okay, Leader, I think it's fair to say.
I think Willie wants back, actually.
Sorry, Willie.
Aye, and just maybe to echo the views or the sentiments expressed by Rob, and that's to thank Steve and his team, and again thank him for the representation that he's making on this hardship, and hopefully something can come out of those representations that he is making, because it is unfair on people within the region who also happen to be in that tenanted situation and not owning the property where they're trading their own business from. Steve referred to being fleet of foot. I would hope that's an indication that we would act swiftly on anything that Mid and East Antrim Borough Council are doing, and that you do have I would hope you'd have delegated powers with you, the Deputy Leader and the Chief Executive, just to do that very thing, so that we don't miss out, or no, maybe miss out, but that we're at the table as quickly as possible on the recovery. Thanks, Convener.
You had something on the same point.
So sorry, just particularly in the Borderlands, I think, the projections that the ONS and others have come up with are pretty stark. I think, I think the Borderlands project in particular is a clear example where actually, if money is to be spent in economic development, where actually it could be sort of moved at pace. Because I think it's fair to say that the recovery will stretch into years and months, and actually if there's a possibility of us being able to create the number of jobs, then it could have a huge benefit to us, coming with this.
They were asking to reduce the spend profile, reduce the time scale of the spend profile to 5 to 10 years rather than the longer time scale to get the investment in fast. Councillor Hislop.
I think one of the big things economically we need to do is open up like English Street, open up like Kit Bank, wherever. Now it might sound funny, but the staff who work in there actually contribute more to the town centre economy than what you would take. Militia House, I think, was closed last year for refurbishment, and I know I was in one of the takeaway places that was as well closing the doors. Now that's the effect people have on the town centre. You'll have the school children coming out at lunchtime. Well, people want to actually go into town centres when you've got a fourth of children because they'll go to school and when they come out they'll talk to their pals and they're walking in big groups down. So you have to look at that. How are we going to maintain those sort of issues going forward to encourage people back if they're not working in the town centre? Because I would take it from this, one of the things that we will be looking to do is to have home working more, because we've seen here, you know, it saves us in the carbon footprint. People can do it from home, so they're not going to, do we need all these built? This is going to have an impact, maybe the knock-on effect that we didn't realise. So I think we have to look at that as well as when we go forward. How are we going to stimulate people actually coming in if we encourage them to stay at home to work?
Councillor Carruthers.
Thanks, Leader. I'm in a poor signal area, so I won't take long. Just to thank Steve and team for all the hard work that they're doing. But Steve, I need you, it's maybe an odd request, but I need you to call me as late on today as possible, just in regards to Willie mentioned about the links with Northern Ireland. You and I have had a discussion about that, but I need a verbal update from yourself, please. Thank you.
Councillor Thompson.
Thanks, Leader. Yeah, so I'm glad Borderlands has been mentioned, because I was going to ask just how exactly should we really look at Borderlands, given that a lot of things have changed maybe since we agreed a way forward and the kind of priorities that were set in that. And obviously there were big ticket items to do with digital infrastructure, normal infrastructure as you might call it, and energy, all of which are still playing a key role even in this emergency situation. So I think there's certain things there that we've identified the right things, shall we say, but I think there's certain things we can accelerate with those in terms of developing and strengthening the infrastructure. So I'd welcome any report back on where we sit with Borderlands and how we're working to make ready the projects that we'd like to bring forward first. I think that does tie into the ideas and suggestions about local solutions like closing roads, for example, which I mean, they're examples of things that might work in one particular community, but obviously you can't do a sort of blanket approach to that. So it's very much a place-based, in the round assessment of you don't want to close the A7 or a major transport route just to close a road for a local cafe to open. But equally, there'll be some roads that you think, well, actually that'll work for the whole community and still support the distribution infrastructure as well. So I'd welcome back, in the back of Councillor Wilson's suggestion, something that would be providing members with those kind of opportunities and ideas so we can get a clearer sense both strategically and locally of the opportunities that would have to come out of this. Just on Steve's report, what's the sort of turnaround time? You're talking about changes to guidance from the Scottish Government regarding tenants and landlords where the rate situation might be a benefit to the landlord, not necessarily the tenant, for example, and especially in cases where there's a charity involved which might be excluded from rates altogether. So is there a turnaround time when we may expect to get guidance back that would clarify that for the number of people affected in our region? And there's also talk about partnerships. Obviously partnerships require both partners to want to work together, and while we are obviously trying to be as flexible as possible, sometimes other partners might find that more of a challenge for whatever reason. So are we sure we've got our partners, for example, South of Scotland Enterprise, being as open as possible to try and accelerate the applications that are maybe going to them, where we might be able to provide support and maybe they don't yet know how to accept that support? Is that something that we can find another way to push forward on?
Leader, yes. I'll just pick up that last point first, Councillor Thompson. Certainly, we have established now joint working relationships with the agency. I think we do need to bear in mind that the agency was only created on the 1st of April and essentially has struggled to get itself up to capacity in terms because of the environment that they were kind of born into, if you like. So we have offered help and support to them. We've had some input into assisting them with some of their appraisal process for one of the grant schemes, or two of their grant schemes. We've been carrying out cross-checking with our own grant schemes because the whole purpose of of their schemes is that they're supposed to pick up some of the gaps that exist in the property scheme. So we're trying to work with them to avoid double funding. I think, if I'm being perfectly honest, the input that we've had in terms of having the political support of the strategic group has really helped to cement those operational relationships. Just moving on to the points that you're making about town centres and so on, absolutely, it's never, I don't think, a case of one approach or one size fits all. All of our town centres are very different. So I think the thinking is that we would need to take that down very much to a place level if it's to be done successfully. So whilst we might have a strategic approach that says these are the sorts of opportunities that we think we need to put in place to support our town centres, the way in which that is rolled out at a local level is going to have to be different for each of our centres, and also needs to reflect what local businesses and local communities actually want to see. The turnaround time, I think you mentioned about the feeding back of issues to Scottish Government. Some of them they've responded to really very quickly, others has taken a little bit more time. I think with some of them they have to be clear about understanding what the budget implications would be if they were to loosen things up, so that there has to be advice given to the Minister to say, look, if we make this change, this is what it's going to unleash in terms of new applications, and either there is or there isn't budget to support that. So with some of them, we've heard that very quickly. Leader, I think, on the call that you were involved with, they made some noises about the charitable relief. Well, that came back within a week. That had been released, whereas some of these other issues have been sitting with them for a good few weeks now, probably because they're a little bit more difficult for them to address.
And just on the wider side of Borderlands, obviously you've had the leaders maybe had meetings recently, but I think that's something that maybe the wider members of the council would probably welcome hearing a little bit more about, just sort of refresh where we were and where we think we are and where we need to be with bringing Borderlands forward. Is that something that who would be able to maybe speak to that?
Yes, well, we could certainly do that as part of the report that comes back on the
I would advise not.
June.
There's nobody in government to talk to. So members have enough to do, in my view, than not start revisiting something that, until we have a chance to speak to anybody in government, there's not a single person in government you can speak to. It's their money, and therefore I think that we need to wait to see we get engaged with someone like Mr. Matheson to find out. I think we start to reshape within the parameters we've got, but to start thinking that we can change those parameters at this point until we've actually been able to have a meeting with both governments at the moment. And certainly, I think we can write and start it, but to have members, what would you be starting to shape? I mean, I think we need to try to look at what we've got just now and then bring something back at that point, but I'd caution against us imagining that we can now suddenly say, now we're going to have fantastically wonderful, brand new ideas in a different shape before we actually have that initial meeting between leaders and government. I think after that, we'd then have a framework. If members wish to start the process, fine, but I'm trying to work at what you're looking to achieve, beyond trying to reshape some of the programmes that we've managed to agree with government, which we can shape, but the overall shape of it is very much in what at the moment the Cabinet Secretary would want us. And at the moment there isn't anyone to speak to. The person we would have spoken to now works with the enterprise company.
So I think, maybe it was a question, but it was more, I think if we're having Borderlands in mind when we're talking about the wider strategic vision of how we go forward on the back of not just this current situation, but the priorities we've already identified and encapsulated within what we understand as the Borderlands scheme, if you like. I think we have to take that in the fullest understanding of how we go forward. If we're going to talk about making strategic revisions to how we come out of this emergency, then we're looking at regional, national, across the water, all these sort of different things that will play into how we can best put our foot forward to be the most sustainable and effective as we can be. So I can't see the harm in being able to remind ourselves, well, actually, here's the priorities we had already identified in Borderlands. I'm not seeking to rush to change it. I'm just seeking to say, how carefully do we need to take these forward in the wider strategic vision that we have as we come out of this? And is there a way that we could prioritise one thing over another in a way that we might not have done prior to this emergency?
Some of that work has been done anyway. I mean, I think we have to bear in mind that there is an agreement with the two governments in terms of exit terms and the submission of the business cases. So I don't think any of that can be unravelled. That is where it is. What's happened since is actually just before the emergency, after the election of the UK government and the suggestion that there was going to be further investment in the north of the country, we sent a letter asking for more money, basically. Well, if you really want to invest in the north of the country, and then use a mechanism by which you could put more funding in. And then since then, and there's only been one meeting of leaders, and that's really been looking at how basically where the various projects and programmes are at the moment, if there are problems with them, and there is a bit of a problem with the energy one in terms of the revenue, that we require some revenue funding at the moment. The UK government is being a little bit difficult about finding out creative ways of enabling some of that to be funded, so there's an issue there. But the rest of it is looking at how, in fact, we could accelerate, not changing what we're doing, but accelerating the funding for what we're doing, bring things forward that could actually interact with, which would aid economic recovery, and to make that, I think it was what Jen we were writing to make some of the case about that in terms of how that could help with the communities and so on. So.
To be fair, Leader, I think that's exactly the kind of information that is now coming out this very minute that might be useful for the wider members of the council to actually hear that, well, maybe there is an issue with one of the things, but we're addressing that, or maybe
we're trying to address that. So as of last week, there wasn't a solution yet that the government had been prepared to accept, unfortunately. But,
perhaps Leader, in the next paper when we talk about how we move to restart, we could perhaps touch on some of the timescales the government's setting around perhaps a new strategic direction, strategic financial plan, and then at that point we'd want to bring together all the strands that the council might wish to pursue under that banner, because it would be radically different than the current plan that we're working to. So I think again that probably would suit towards more a July discussion than a June discussion, if that's helpful.
I don't have anybody else down as wanting to speak, but there does seem to be a proposal. I know there's not actually a paper with recommendations on this item. There seems to be a proposal from Councillor Scobie and Councillor Davidson that there should be a delegation of powers to Leader, Deputy Leader and Chief Executive in taking forward the Mid and East Antrim potential for some sort of agreement. Moving forward for a Borderlands type of a channel partnership type of thing.
Leader, I would be in support of that. I was going to suggest maybe some of the education things and the licensing and wider schemes that we spoke about being included in the recommendations, but I was actually just going to suggest that there may be including the recommendations on the next item.
Yeah, I think it might be the next
just to sort of tidy up a wee bit.
Yeah, that might be. Councillor Davidson wants to speak.
I was probably inclined to be slightly more cautious than Willie, but I mean, if there is general agreement that in the first instance we can hold the discussions, then I think that might be a starting point. I think it's important to emphasise that what Mid and East Antrim have asked us, if we'd like to consider, informally, have asked us at this point, I should say, and I think a formal request will follow, is actually getting the North Channel Partnership up and running. I suppose very much in the same theme as we were talking about the Regional Economic Partnership. These were things that we had been intending to do and of course had to be delayed. The first meeting of the North Channel Partnership would have been at the beginning of this month, for example. So I mean that I think is the starting point from their perspective. So I was initially inclined to be slightly more cautious about that. But if there is a general feeling that we should push ahead, at least in having discussions and gathering information for members to consider, then I'm quite content with that.
I don't think we need delegations withdrawn. I'd be reluctant to withdraw delegations because actually I think we have a council decision to pursue a number of strands, and I think all you're asking us to do is now take this opportunity to pursue that and bring something back. We already have council meetings set up in June and July, so at the appropriate point we can bring something back. So I don't think it needs any more than councillors have given us. You just tell us to get on with it, and we'll arrange to have those discussions that have already been started, if that's acceptable to members, rather than actually remove delegations, which I think is always a dangerous route. If there's an alternative, just get on with it.
Okay, can we move on now to item 7, which is a related issue on the framework for decision making. This report provides information for elected members on the Scottish Government's COVID-19 framework for decision making, which was published on the 23rd of April, and the update published on the 5th of May. The framework sets out the national issues that will inform the initial changes to the current lockdown. And obviously, there's been progress on that since then, with a statement to Parliament yesterday. Elected members are also advised of the focus of the Council's response to the COVID-19 pandemic and early consideration on restart and recovery planning in the context of this and the national framework. And we have Lorna on Teams to answer any questions. Lorna, do you want to say anything before we go to questions?
Thanks, Leader. I think there's been a good discussion round about this already, so I'm happy to take questions.
Anybody further questions? Councillor Hislop.
Just a quick one. When we actually go to the sort of government's framework for coming out of this, where will we get definitions of things? Because we've already had one of what's a small retail unit, what's a large retail unit. It came from one of the local stores in Dumfries, which I would consider large, but he thinks would be unfair of him not being able to open. So it's things like that. Where will we get that information?
That we're hoping to get the guidance, Councillor Hislop, out next week. It's one of the calls that I'm monitoring just now, one of the other conferences I'm supposed to be on. So I'm hoping to get some explanatory guidance around that next week. The Strategic Coordinating Group is meeting this morning, which is all of the partners, including private sector. So those questions are being raised. So we hope to see the site of that guidance probably Tuesday of next week, which gives us a couple of days to get on with it. So again, that's currently being drafted to underpin it. I think one of the issues from that, but not only that, if you take the other side, is we've got the Gold Command meeting this afternoon with areas of how are we going to police and oversight this will also need to be discussed. And of course there's national conversation again in Weatherphone going on just now, exactly how some of the, how does people travel to see you but then don't go in your house? How do you police that? And you scale it up from there to, how many at a beach or a park then becomes an issue. So again, we'd hope to give clarity through to members and briefing note next week of some of the early sites and that. So we'll put together a very short brief on some of those key ones as much as we know at that point. So I'll make sure that Richard supplies that. I think it'd probably better is directly to all members rather than through the normal daily brief, so that, because I think those are key Q&As. So we've asked for a Q&A, let's see if we get it.
Right, thank you.
Any further points? We didn't actually cover quite a lot of the issues in the report in our earlier
I wonder if it could be helpful, members. I've seen the first side of a discussion with Alison Stafford, who's Director General leading Renew Restart for Government. And just to give you some idea of the time scale, that again, it helps some of the conversations that members are having, that the initial policy direction looks to be set in the beginning of June nationally. Through June, all public bodies will be asked questions around what have you done differently that you'd like to keep. What have been some of the successes, like there isn't a homeless person. Magically, we've solved a problem that stopped us. But then at the end of June into July, they will then say, and this is what we public bodies will now do. So we'll move into that phase nationally. So we will now do different ways, such as, say, the health service. You'll not have a direct access to a GP, you'll have a triaged access to a GP, because that's how it worked. And you can take it down into a number of areas, with potentially the start of the Renew being September. So that might push back depending on where we are in COVID. But that shows the pace through June again. If you add it onto the workload of our current team, are feeding back into that process. So that starts to say that potentially into June will be about our submissions about what we've done differently for full council. July, where we're reacting to the policy direction of we would expect, in particular under council statutory responsibilities, this is what you will be now need to look, how the outcome will need to be delivered differently for you, and then work that up through to September, October and into the council's renew plan. So it just helps. At the moment I've only just had a conversation and seen some slides that's been to Cabinet, so hopefully as we get into June I'll be able to do a proper paper for members, working with Lorna and our team to give you a proper papers of the shape and how our renew restart needs to fit into the national time scale. But at the moment it's just a series of slides at the moment that I've reached still to get through Cabinet. But it just gives you the pace that June will bring in shaping up some of that. So I hope you found that helpful, because I think it fits some of the conversations you've had about when we really need to be starting to look perhaps in July into a restart budget proposal.
Right, any other further questions for Lorna? Jane, Councillor Maitland.
Thank you very much indeed. Look, it is throughout the entire report that the issue is definitely there, but what I am concerned about is to recognise that there is a big appetite, I think, out there among the public to capture the opportunities in terms of carbon change, and I suppose I'm really asking us to ask officers how that is going to be, I think, shared with the public, in order that they are assured that we are going to grab the opportunities that we have been given.
Thanks. Laura, I want to come in too.
Thanks, Jane. I think that's a really pertinent question about the restart and indeed any recovery work that we pursue, because there's been significant changes in what we do and how we've done things over the last 10 weeks that we need to capture. Not least the reduction in travel, the different ways of working that we've been able to secure, and that's had a massive impact just in our travel and fuel costs already. There's also further opportunities in terms of the public's appetite around this that we need to secure. We did set out some of this through transformation, and I think there's a real opportunity to accelerate much of this as well. I think just related and aside to the comments that have been made in the previous item, the big challenge for the council will be through restart and recovery, capturing all these things, working methodically through them, but we also have to recognise the capacity of the council with the number of work streams that will continue through the route map that we'll have to sustain, perhaps in different ways, and also reflecting Councillor Wilson's comments about education recovery. That's going to take a significant amount of the council's wider internal resource to really mobilise that as well. So it's really, I think, one of the things that we must bring back to members is a real sense of the scale of the restart, the scale of the recovery work that we need to focus on, and the impact on the work streams that we've already secured and are maintaining as part of government response work. So it's just trying to get the scale of that and convey the scale of that, and I think we wouldn't do justice to it even in the paper that we've produced at this stage.
Any further comments? Councillor Wilson.
I suppose if nobody else coming in, but we're going to move on to recommendations, as I alluded to in the previous item. I think there's maybe also spoke about an education, but on the sort of licensing issues and supporting local businesses. I don't know if we could maybe reflect those in the recommendations. I think certainly on the education matter, I think just to agree that obviously it will be a subject of next week's seminar, but also about a report coming back to full council. I think it's important for members who are obviously not the subcommittee to know that report coming back to full council is, I'm sure there'll be a lot of meat in that report, and there's going to be huge consequences for individual schools and for the wider region. I think that it's important that all members read into that decision, but then also just to request that a report comes back to the subcommittee on the capacity in dealing with licensing matters and sort of that framework of supporting town centre businesses and sort of recognising that that's going to be taken a bit more urgently.
Yeah, I'm just wondering whether we've got the education member seminar coming up next week, whether it is worth having something on the economic recovery. So that people can maybe feed in. Obviously, I mean, we want that consultation with local businesses and so on, as well as local members, but whether actually that merits a wider discussion in terms of the opportunities across different parts of the region.
Yeah, no, I'd agree with that.
I think that might be part of it. Somebody's... Laura was working.
Thank you, Leader. I mean, I think one of the things we suggested was that we need to create opportunities for further discussion with members on Restart Recovery renewal through June. Mindful of, I think, the comments that were made by members in earlier discussion, which is this is really difficult stuff, and we have worked very hard through a kind of initial crisis response phase, but there's a great deal of uncertainty. We've never done some of these things before, so all opportunity to engage members in that thinking and discussion, and if that's through the member seminar route or there's further opportunities members wish to take with officers through June, then absolutely we'll support that and make sure we put those arrangements in place.
I mean, obviously it's going to be a fairly detailed amount of consultation on that, but maybe the opportunity for members to feed in from their own local experience, from their local businesses, or talking to them, that it might be helpful as part of the process of developing our strategy.
I'm wondering whether or not, Leader, in advance of the member involvement, we try, some webinars talking to businesses, but set the and communities, but set the context so it's not about tells them that's me grants, but actually it's about that strategic. If you're going to restart your local community, your local area, what do you think? What are the things would enable you to do it? Type conversation. So therefore, when members at the seminar, there's evidence in front of members of how would we take that forward. Again, it's about how do we pace into it so we don't have a meeting to then have another meeting. Perhaps if we did some preliminary work, it would allow you to take some quick decisions. We need to do this for licensing, we need to do this for roads, we need to do this because we've got this. And the webinar approach seems to be working very well internally with staff, etc., and generating really good ideas. So if we can go back to the programme for members' consideration of how we might do that.
I think there is another webinar on business support, so I don't know how well progressed that is, but maybe that could be something. I think Lauren is wanting to add something.
Thanks, Leader. I think it's probably many routes that we can take around this rather than when the webinars are helpful, and I think they've been well engaged with. I think we've redefined how we might exercise some of the work on community conversations remotely and to engage people. So I think we need to get onto that in support of members and work our way through some of these and present them as ways forward very early doors so we can deploy them in June to get that information back in front of members if you're agreeable to that.
Okay, anybody else? Okay, so you just said something?
Please, Chair, if I could come in. I was cut out there, and that's me just rejoined. The computer crashed or the Wi-Fi crashed, so that's me just getting in. I take it, we are on item 7.
We are, yes.
Thanks, Chair. It's really just the point being made in 3.35 and 3.36. And Richard stated earlier in his report of the tremendous work that the voluntary sector are doing, and in the report it does mention that the voluntary sector has been invaluable through the partnership working. I'm just wondering, as the lockdown is starting to relax, and we may be coming out of COVID-19, but there's still a great deal of work to be done, still working in partnership with the third sector and the community resilience group, etc. They obviously still will be looking for funding. Will we have enough funding available to provide them to continue? Because as furlough starts again to be reviewed, I know he's keeping it going until August. but this could go on for some considerable time. And will there be enough funding available for the community groups? I'm particularly looking at, I know what the Fed Up Cafe and the community reuse shop have been doing 200 meals per day, hot meals per day out to vulnerable people in the community. And I think Kate's Kitchen and other areas have been doing the same or similar work. I just want to ask if there's going to be the money available.
I think that might actually be covered in the next item when we get forward with this for agenda item 8.
Yeah.
But maybe that we might be better covered in that item.
And I think the only point I would make that communities have twice as much money given to them as local authorities. 500 million in comparison to just over 200 million the local authorities have received to get through this crisis. There is the communities are awash with money. I think it's what we're needing to do is analyse where that money is being spent, because it's not being directed by local authorities. So therefore there's a big issue across the country as to what that money being spent on in the local areas. That's a piece of work we've already got underway nationally. But again, it's something that £500 million has been given out in various community direct funding in to support those organisations. But Paul will be able to give us a better analysis.
My understanding from Norman Austin Hart as for the Chief Executive of Third Sector Dumfries and Galloway is that, as from what she can see, we haven't had our share of that. From what she's able to ascertain. But shall we, if we can conclude item 7 first and then we'll go on to item 8 and Laura, you would like him?
Thanks, Leader. I just wanted to kind of add in terms of the third sector funding and indeed the work we've been doing in the community groups around food and other community support. So part of that was we didn't understand, or the government had announced much of the funding very early doors around their hardship funding. And we're also recognising, and Steve and Kirsty Peden have been examining the funding that's been attracted into the region by social enterprise, third sector and other community groups as well. And one of the things we are looking at is to the extent we can support community groups that may have not applied for funding through the national pots or haven't the capacity at this stage to do it, given the significant and marvellous work they're doing to support people, what we can do to help them access that funding as well. So as part of the future financial reports, Paul might cover it gently today, but certainly future financial reports will come forward with a much crisper position on that.
If I could come back in. Aye. No, Gavin, I take the point you're making, and perhaps we need to be shouting a bit louder or going to Scottish Government and really getting the money that we do require to take us out of this COVID-19. But I'm quite happy with what we're saying, raise it under item 8.
I think so. I've had sort of put forward those two sort of additional recommendations. So I think that we're all in agreement as to the way in which these things should be handled. So I don't know if we want to take those or not, but be happy not to.
Have you got words to put to that, or just a general agreement?
Those words that I'd read out, but I think certainly I haven't heard any disagreement on how we would handle those two issues, and certainly a couple of members have texted me to remind us that obviously. Although schools aren't due to go back to the 11th of August, teachers are going to be expected to return earlier than this. Yes. And I need to discuss that as well, and obviously the seminar next week will give an opportunity for that. So,
and that is the whole issue about how the childcare is going to function over the summer holidays, when the teachers will be on holiday.
Yeah. I don't know if we want to follow those recommendations down, but I suppose there's general agreement as to how we go down and not need to.
And then we'll seek ways in consulting with the local businesses and consulting further with the wider membership of the council in terms of actually how we progress with restart and recovery.
Perhaps if at the note of the meeting then, if Nick clarifies our understanding, it's probably the easiest way, because I think there are many strands around this, so perhaps if Nick, following the meeting, we can clarify just to make sure that what's in general agreement is actually what members understood, because I think there are a number of strands that join together there, so if we can just unpick it and then send the note round, just clarifying that that's exactly what members
I think as well, we could sit and have a 10-minute discussion of what the wording of the recommendation is, but I think there's a general agreement as to how we go down there and that we can afterwards.
Yes, and I'm conscious of the time that I
So Leader,
I've just gone out of the freezer for my lunch and I think I'm going to be having my tea at this
same point there. So obviously, just noticing on the contributions from the board there, Councillor Maitland asking about the wording. Obviously, I think we're not really having hard recommendations as such here, but I think there is a general sense. I don't know if we all agree about everything, but we certainly do want to find a sort of sensible way forward. We sound things out. We have whatever means of getting the information all in one place and then taking that forward and getting a note of that, so it will capture everything rather than the prescriptive form of words.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So are we content to agree the recommendations?
Perhaps it's Councillor Scobie. I think he was offline when we agreed.
Oh, right, okay, can we just reiterate for Councillor Scobie about our...
Councillor Scobie, I just said I don't think we need delegated powers. I think we just need to get on and do it. Get the meetings arranged and the discussions held and then come back to members. Does that fulfil your wish? I don't think we need the delegated powers. I just think it's an agreement around the room that we'll just get on and make the contact with the Northern Ireland and move forward on it.
That's tremendous, Gavin, and meets all my requirements anyway.
So I'm content to agree the recommendations 2.1, 2.2, 2.3 and 2.4 on item 7, is that?
Yeah.
And then we're going to have, it's going to bring together some of the points in the discussion.
We'll work something up and circulate it, Chair.
Okay, let's move on to item 8. So this report provides members with an update on the main financial implications for the Council associated with the COVID-19 emergency response period, taking into account recent announcements in relation to additional funding to be provided to local government. There's clearly a challenge in assessment at this early stage, but it is important for members to note that we have rigorous monitoring arrangements in place to capture the information and that we have a strong voice in national dialogue at officer and member level. And we've got Paul on Teams to answer any questions. I suppose, first of all, Paul, maybe you could address the issues that Councillor Scobie, I think you may have heard them, Councillor Scobie made in the previous item with regard to the funding for communities and so on.
Thanks very much, Leader. Yes, just pick up on the overall report, but before moving to that question, it's reflected in the report that the Council is well placed to deal with the immediate term financial implications of the COVID response period. And the focus today at both a local and national level has largely been on that immediate term response period, and information we've been providing to the Scottish Government to try and secure resources for councils has focused on the period up to June. I think just linking up to the earlier discussions in this meeting, the focus now is very much moving to the period beyond that immediate response period. We spoke to Cosley yesterday about the importance of ensuring that the Scottish Government start to get a greater appreciation of the impacts on councils going forward over the medium term. In terms of issues like the ongoing need for emergency response measures, but also the impact on our normal budgets in terms of income losses, and also the very significant impact there's likely to be on how we go about delivering our services going forward and the costs that will be associated with that. And also as well the need for resources to support the economic and social recovery process as we come out of this. So it's important that we do continue to engage with the Scottish Government on the need for resources to support that, and that links into a couple other questions that were mentioned earlier on. On the education costs that were discussed in the kind of first item, one of the kind of concerns there's been with government is that there's been an indication that the government feel as though there's significant funding flexibility available to council through redirecting ring-fence resources, particularly in relation to 1140 hours delivery, but also other elements as well. And one of the things that we're trying to do at the minute is to try and gather information from council to ensure that the Scottish Government have a clearer picture on the kind of demands and commitments that councils have made in respect of those services, because it's not consistent across the council, across the country, and it is important that the Scottish Government have a more developed understanding of the issues there and the potential degree of flexibility available. The other, just coming to Councillor Scobie's point on the support to communities, and really just aligning with what Lorna was saying, this council was very quick off the mark in terms of identifying resources to support the community response to the COVID emergency, and the committee at the end of March actually allocated significant funding to community groups to support that, and that was largely in advance of the Scottish Government making available wider community support funding. As the Chief Executive said, that's been very substantial, and one of the things we've been keen to ensure is that local community groups don't feel as though because they're getting money from the council they don't need to apply or bid for funding from these national resources, because in a lot of cases these monies are based on a kind of bid funds and requests approach. So we're kind of liaising with officers and with groups to try and ensure that we maximise the funding being made available to Dumfries and Galloway through continuing to bid towards those national schemes. So I think at the minute, both through the national funding and through the monies that the council has initially allocated, that there is significant resources there available to support the ongoing communities support initiatives. But obviously that's something we'll continue to monitor as this response period continues. But otherwise, happy to answer any other questions that members might have in relation to the report.
Thank you. Councillor Hislop.
We hear, there's a lot of cost, but has there been any positives came out of this with regard to if transport costs are down because we're not paying transport, etc. Have we had any other savings, energy efficiency savings because we're not using filters, etc.?
The two you mentioned are the key ones. The report that I put to this committee last month, it was kind of in sections which highlighted the additional emergency costs, the impact on our normal budgets, and also some of the savings that the council's been able to make during this period. And transport and energy were the key ones that were identified in that report. There are other areas as well. Just as an example, in terms of support to businesses, one of the things that the Scottish Government announced was that they would not be increasing the non-domestic rate poundage this year. So although the council does not benefit from the wider kind of business support measures directly, because we're a ratepayer, we do make a saving there. I think it's about £180,000 that we'll not be paying through the kind of cessation of that increase in the NDR, so the NDR poundage. So that's one area. So we're continuing to try and gather these kind of savings, but to be honest, obviously that they're swamped by the impact of the increased costs associated with this period and the loss of income as well. But obviously we'll continue to look at both sides of the equation as we go forward with this.
I note through Adam that some of the people who are trying to listen in are having difficulty hearing everybody. I think some of the audio problem is possibly with remote members, because I think there's still some issues about audio.
For us in the room, it's sometimes quite difficult, so maybe we speak a bit louder, it might help.
But it's the people in the room or the audio or the remote?
People in the room.
Ah, right, okay.
Leader, I think it's helpful for context that the national position around councils is completely, it's not the same everywhere. I think some of the areas such as Edinburgh, they've had enormous income hits since March, I'm sure Paul will say, because actually the nature of their budget is based more around tourism, transport, even down to simple things like loss of income for Glasgow and parking fines. Although it's a discrete budget, it's significant. So Edinburgh's biggest problem actually is that first year in, I think, 20 years, Paul, Edinburgh don't have a balanced budget at the end of last year, and it was the fall of income. We are not that heavily, but we do have areas of income, I'm sure Paul alludes to, such as planning, etc., which are going to go down. So again, these will be tails that will be quite long lasting for us before some of those services start to build back up. But some of the other councils are very, very badly affected by the loss of income, more disproportionately in Dumfries and Galloway. So that's why you hear the national discussions. It's not apples and apples at the moment. And again, that's part of the areas like Dundee. And again, as I've told members before, some councils such as Aberdeen City, their borrowing is so exceptionally higher than other councils that just servicing that is becoming an issue for them. And in Fife, it's because they burned through the reserves. So again, it's the prudence of the council's previous decisions that allows us to be sitting here just now with a challenging position. But in other councils, they're sitting with an incredibly difficult position just now. And in fact, it was mentioned this morning that Edinburgh is quite seriously considering whether or not in the accounts it says it was a going concern as a material thing. So again, that just shows the different degree that councils are being hit, depending upon where they entered the process. So again, but that's not an accident. We are where we are. We've been financially prudent as a council for many, many years, and this is the time that you built that up to be able to ride this wave out initially to allow planning time. But for some other councils, it's crisis moment, and again, Paul will be reflecting that through the finance directors. We're in very, very different positions. That's why a one-size-fits-all allocation isn't working at the moment.
I think what we have to be careful of course, is that we don't get the situation where distribution is based on those who are trying most because they haven't made the prudent decisions. And councils like ours, which have for many, many years, not this administration, but many previous administrations, have run a very prudent financial system, that we don't actually end up being penalised for it. I think, Councillor Thompson.
Yeah, thanks, Leader. So it's just on the table under 3.1, Paul. So the net impact on budgeted services, which obviously you've touched on in answer to Councillor Hislop's question, it would be helpful to maybe get that broken down, because obviously on a monthly basis, for example, it's been a couple of months, let's say, where we've been under these sort of measures, and say on average maybe 30 odd million a month going out the door, and this is like 1.275, maybe more than that, you're sort of saying, in terms of net. So is it possible to sort of break that down to what we would normally spend and what less we're spending, that would demonstrate the amount that we're spending or not spending on transport and or energy?
Yes, happy to provide that further information. That table that's at paragraph 3.1 is really a reflection of greater detail that was provided in the last report to this committee, and what the plan is and the process we're going through at the minute is updating each of those costings with a view to bringing forward an update on the overall financial implications in a bit more detail to come to the full council meeting next month. So we'll certainly look to produce that additional information to support that report. And just to echo what the Chief Executive was saying regarding the impact across Scotland, I've had the opportunity to get a handle on how the costs are impacting on other local authorities in this period, and those city authorities that have got a significant reliance on income as part of balancing their budget under normal circumstances have been very badly affected to date by the emergency response period, which hasn't been quite to the same extent here in other rural authorities. But on the other hand, there has been greater costs to an extent associated with some of the response activities during this period. So when it comes, just touching on what the leader mentioned there, when it comes to the distribution discussions, what we're trying to ensure that those points are made as well, so that rural authorities don't lose out when it comes to those considerations of future funding allocations.
Thank you.
Okay, any further questions for Paul? Thanks, Paul, and we know that there will be a further report to full council at the end of next month, where we will have a bit more detailed information about both where we made savings and where we made or indeed where maybe the expenses are higher than the report that came last month didn't detail quite a number of what appeared to be the position in terms of expenditure and so on, but we're noting in this one that there is further pressures, maybe higher than was anticipated last month, but also maybe areas where it is better as well. Continue to agree the recommendations.
Agreed.
And the next one is on our decision-making processes. The purpose of this report was to consider the decision-making, engagement and information arrangements for the East Galway Council during the extended response to the COVID-19 emergency and the stage and likely complex restart and eventual recovery stages for all aspects of the Council operations and activities following national guidance and requirements. The ongoing online briefings in particular have been well received and supported, and I would commend and thank all members who have made real efforts to develop their skills using technology. And for all that Councillor Scobie says he doesn't like it, he uses it very effectively. We gave a commitment in setting up the subcommittee that it would be for as short a time as possible. So I would expect the paper coming forward to full council to move towards a committee schedule in some form, possibly with a different frequency and amount of business. Liz Manson is available on Teams to assist members with any questions. And can I invite people to come forward? Councillor Wilson.
Thanks, Leader. I think, I'm fully supportive of the paper that's in front of us, and particularly thank the staff who put together a range of opportunities for elected members to continue to feed in. I think it's important that we recognise that we'll have that full council at the end of June, and I think that although as a council we are trying to do as much as we can to make sure that we're family friendly, I think it's wholly appropriate that, given the nature of the situation that we're in, that we have that full council at the end of July as well. I think I'm supportive of the paper that's here, but I think obviously between now and full council, I don't think we should rule out bending it further. Maybe given the earlier conversation, things like the licensing panel and licensing board meeting more frequently. Maybe things such as a planning applications committee getting started back up are maybe things we should consider between now and then. I think that the technology is working, and looking at the government guidance, we're certainly going to be needing to implement these measures for quite a significant time to come. That maybe actually sort of rolling it out to some of the bigger committees in the shorter term wouldn't be such a bad idea, particularly if sort of committed business does start to increase via planning and licensing and the licensing boards. That we sort of have a gradual restart back to sort of full committee structure over the next couple of months. But certainly, the paper in front of us today, absolutely fine, but also not lose sight of the fact that we may need to make some smaller creeping amendments over the next month.
Okay. Liz, do you want to?
No, very happy, thank you, Chair, to add in to 2.3 that we include licensing boards as appropriate in that recommendation. Thank you.
We've got Councillor Davidson.
Thanks, Leader. I'm definitely in agreement with Adam about the importance of us looking to restart planning and licensing. I should imagine that returning to the way that we have operated the Planning Applications Committee and facilitating public speaking by presumably predominantly digital methods will be a bit of a challenge. But we've already achieved over 2 months the things that had taken us, years to get to. So I don't think it's insurmountable. And of course, that this has been live streamed today, and that's another step forward. What I did want to say, and fully agreeing that we should be going back to a calendar of committee business, I would certainly want us to be assured that we're going to continue to have the opportunity for members to participate remotely. For so far as I can see, 3 reasons. Firstly being in terms of both social distancing and test, trace, isolate and support, we're still going to have to minimise the number of people that are in rooms together for the foreseeable future. Secondly, that I know that so far as the SNP group is concerned, there are members who would wish to continue to be cautious about how they are moving about for good and valid health reasons. And finally, that I think some of the members of the SNP group were the foremost in advocating for the rights to participate remotely in the first place, and that arguably that took a bit longer than we would have liked. So I wouldn't for a minute wish to stop Councillor Scobie or anybody else who wants to drive from Stranraer or Langham or wherever coming into Dumfries. That's their right and privilege as members. But I wouldn't want that to be at the expense of the members who have actually wished to participate remotely for quite some time. And I found it really a great benefit, even in the current circumstances, and we can imagine will be even more beneficial when we go back to doing meetings in the new normal. So I really want to flag that up, that, very happy to see Willie back in continue to allow members to participate remotely for the foreseeable future, or indeed as a permanent change to how we do things. Thank you.
Personally, I would hope it would be a permanent change, that we would allow this facility at full council on all committees when they come forward, irrespective of the situation. I think we've made strides in learning how to do this, and I think for many reasons that it would be desirable that we continue in this in the current vein. Councillor Scobie.
I don't know if I've heard my name mentioned so often in such a short item, but nevertheless, what you say, Chair, is music to my ears. The sooner we move on to committee systems, the better, as long as it's safe to do so. I do recognise the efforts being made to try and involve all members in the briefings and so forth, but it hasn't worked for everybody. So I can endorse 3.5 where it says it has worked extremely well, and this morning it is an example of that. Now, it may be my Wi-Fi broadband or whatever, but as soon as it happens, you're cut out, and you lose that momentum. You lose the flow or the debate. So I don't think it's working extremely well, or at least for everybody. And I would challenge anyone that says otherwise. So, Adam, technology is not working for everybody. It may be working for some, but not everybody. So the sooner that we move on to the committee cycles for the business to be dealt with by the committee, and I get away from this system, the better I will feel, I can assure you. There's also the issue of voting and how we vote and remotely and all the rest. There are big issues around that. And I only spoke to an MSP this week who echoed the sentiments where the parliaments haven't sorted out voting systems. So there are issues still, in fundamental issues in flow of debate where, you know, and someone said yesterday we haven't had a vote. As such, I think there was at the very first one. Yeah, so, you know, there are issues still to sort out, and there is consensus around COVID-19, which is, and everybody working together non-politically to get things sorted. But there are still issues that need, you know, this system just in my opinion, work for. Thank you.
Yeah, I think it works for some people. I think you're right that for some people it has not been working because they have problems with their broadband and so on, but it does work well for other people, and I would, my view would be that for those for whom it does work well should continue to have that option.
Elaine, I'm not trying to cut out anybody that wants to use this option. They're quite at liberty to use the option. There is a democratic deficit in just what you say there, in terms of it's not working for everybody. If it's not working for everybody, then we are elected, democratically elected, and we should all be having the same. And it's not working for everybody. We've got to address that democratic deficit and have everybody on equal footing. And it's not happening just now. That's what.
But once the committees are up and running again, there will be nothing to stop people from attending, as long as we can observe the 2-metre rule. There will be nothing to prevent anybody from attending who would feel more comfortable about attending in person. But other people may have the facility to be able to attend remotely, and that they also should be able to have the choice of doing that. And I don't think there's actually a great disagreement between any of us about that, really. That you know, it's a different way of working, but not for everyone. The other thing which I've said in the past is that where somebody maybe doesn't live near Dumfries, but maybe doesn't have very good internet connection where they live, that they should be able to use maybe the contact centres or Instagram if you wanted to work from Ashford House. You know, that there should be the opportunity for people to join meetings from there rather than having to travel in. But you may still prefer to travel in. It's actually up to the discretion, I think, of the individual members as to how they want to participate. Adam?
Yeah. No, I think actually you made one of the points for me. Certainly, you know, I think the bigger democratic deficit is actually councils who have sort of suspended all political decision making. up until September. So I think that officers have moved at pace, and actually one of the reasons why we move so quickly is to make sure that we continue to have a democratic system of decision making, but also that actually the safety and the public health advice was observed, not just for elected members but also for our staff who are presenting to committee. So I think that, absolutely, believe it or not, I'm quite keen to get back to the good old days when you see everybody and actually have face-to-face discussion, but I recognise that that's not going to be anytime soon, and that actually technology has allowed us to do that, and hopefully in the very near future places like Sun Street could reopen so that elected members could use the better bandwidth, and hopefully that would help facilitate the decision making and the technology.
Councillor Maitland.
Thank you, Leader. Well, I think probably what I was going to say is that actually I think for most activity with councillors and officers and between councillors, we should be able to default and have most things actually online. I think we should be doing that, if only for the sake of the planet. I think a lot of stuff can be done online, and we should continue to attempt to build on that. I think it's appropriate that we try to see the whites of other elected members' eyes. I'm sure that's the case, but and I am keen to see everyone, of course. But actually, this has not been unsuccessful. I think we need to up the audio quality. But generally speaking, I am pro the remote activity that we've had up till now, and I wouldn't like to go away from it.
Thank you. I think Liz wanted to respond.
Yes, thank you. There's obviously a number of issues through that. You'll see in the survey that was undertaken of elected members, that was exactly to identify where there might be some issues. And you'll see in that there have been a very small number of members who have identified some issues in terms of connectivity or broadband. And certainly our Business and Technology Solutions team will be working with members to address that. I think the second thing just to highlight is that the change to standing orders that had been made is a permanent change, so remote participation will be available for committees and full council indeed going forward. So that is something that will indeed be there. And the last couple of paragraphs in the report highlight that, yes, we will be able to have some physical attendance, and they will be in suitable accommodation. So we'll make sure that, whatever members' needs are, that we work with you to best ensure your participation. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Thompson.
Thanks, Leader. Yeah, so I think, Liz, you'd mentioned you'd taken on board the licensing under that. I think there's also local review bodies planning the licensing panel and licensing boards, I think, and perhaps any other committees that might have quasi-judicial or other statuses. Certainly the biggest feedback I've had from constituents has been about the right to speak or represent a planning committee, and that's one of the things that they've missed, certainly because of the changes that we decided to make for this period, which was understandable. So that's maybe something we'll have to pay particular attention to in terms of how we go back to the new normal. There's also the role of area committees in scrutinising health and social care reports, which I think was touched on yesterday at the IJB meeting, in terms of how do members get to see and scrutinise those reports at area committee level, given that there's one kind of outstanding now, which obviously due to the timing, by the time we get back to some kind of normal, it'll be sort of past its sell-by date, if you like, and obviously there's been a lot of things happening as a result of COVID-19 response, which will be obviously of more interest and relevance. So maybe that's something to be considered as well in terms of the role area committees have played or will play in the future in terms of that local scrutiny for locality health and social care reports.
Thank you.
The decision yesterday was actually those reports were well out of date now because they were pre-COVID, so they will be made available through Teams for members to have a look at and to ask questions of Julie White and others. But you know, we will have to. I think actually maybe even more urgent than that is the committee discretionary budget and the tackling poverty budgets and the decisions that we need to be taken around them.
Yes, and certainly the proposal that will come to full council about re-establishing some of the committee system will include obviously area committees, and some of the issues that we've touched on about how we would handle voting and how the agendas will be composed. These are issues that we're certainly actively looking at just now, and very valid points that I'm pleased to say we're already thinking about.
Just a quick comment on that. Obviously, the IGB took a decision yesterday, but the council hadn't taken the decision. So I think it was more that nuance between while it's correct that the reports that are coming back will be kind of out of date, if you like, it wasn't by virtue of a decision of this council that we wouldn't have those reports. It was the IGB effectively that said maybe we should just circulate it to members. So
well, we didn't have the structure for them to do that. I mean, unless they, I mean, the only alternative, would have been for them to come here, and that is, I don't think is appropriate, because members of the area committees are not the same as membership here. This is not being constructed on a geographic basis. It's been constructed on a political basis, and therefore I would not have been comfortable with this committee scrutinising reports without the input of the members of the area committee, which is the reason I made the suggestion to the IGB that they made them available through Teams, and that there should be a mechanism for individual members to get back and ask questions.
Absolutely, I fully accept the point that it's a locality-based scrutiny. However, I repeat the point, which was like it wasn't the council that determined that yesterday, it was the IGB.
Yeah. One other issue actually, which was suggested actually by a member of the Labour group, Sean Marshall, who does a lot of online work for his employer, is that he has been furnished with a headset with a microphone, which actually improves the audio quality a great deal. And I've also seen somebody use that at COSLA and the Business Gateway Board when I was taking part in that meeting. So I think there was a suggestion that members who wish to participate remotely could maybe be supplied with similar kit, which might improve some of the issues we've had with, particular, I think, with audio, where people sometimes are fading in and out and so on.
Just on that then, Leader, just to reassure members that was very helpful feedback, and we've acted on that through Nick, and we're in the process of procuring that resource. So that was the very benefit of doing the member survey. So thank you, because that was really helpful, and we are indeed going to procure that resource. So thanks to yourself and Sean for flagging that up. Thank you.
Okay, we can tend to well, he's put something. Councillor Scobie, I can't read all of what you put on the screen. So.
No, let's make a just make copy, you know, because I've been waiting months and months for a cut and the printer to be working, and it's
okay.
So
right, okay, I didn't realise it was personal. I couldn't read all of it. That's fine. Okay, are we content to proceed to the recommendations? Okay, we're happy with that, and do we agree with those? And noting that a report will come back, and also that we had seminars, and we haven't actually specified the seminars, mind you, because we had some discussion about the possibility of some sort of seminar which might feed into the sort of recovery process and so on. Okay. Doing some progress now. Item 10 is an update on the Harbours matters, which normally would have gone to Harbours Sub. This report provides a general update on Harbours revenue impacts due to the proposed measures in response to the COVID-19 pandemic, and seeks approval of a reduction in berthing fees for leisure users. And we have James McLeod and Will Jones available on Teams to assist with any questions. So, have we got any questions on the report? Yeah, Councillor Thompson.
I think, well, I welcome the report and I have no particular issue with the recommendations. I think I was really looking to find some kind of update in terms of the harbour revision order, So if the officers are able to maybe provide an update as to where we are today, that would be really helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Leader. Councillor Thompson, yeah, we have made some progress on the harbour revision order to the point where we have feedback from Scottish Government, Transport Scotland colleagues on the proposals within our draft order. The next stage would have been to meet with the two ferry companies, but unfortunately, in contacting them, they've asked to put it back by 6 months. As you can, I'm sure, appreciate, they are having their own challenges to deal with, including particularly, internationally in the drop in the market for cruise ships and such like. So I think they have a number of staff furloughed and have asked to hold back on that. That said, we're still progressing with legal services in terms of some of the items within the order. So that's a brief update. I can provide a further detailed update on that in a written format to the Harbour Subcommittee in due course, if that would be helpful.
That'd be really helpful. Thank you.
Any further questions? Okay. We're happy to proceed to the recommendations then? And to agree 2.1, 2.2 and 2.3. Thank you.
Agreed.
Thank you.
Fine. Okay, thank you. Thanks. So a long wait for not very much.
Absolutely fine. Thank you very much. Stay safe.
Item 11 is the annual review of the Council's local code of corporate governance. This report provides for members consideration and evaluation and scoring of the Council's compliance with the principles contained in the Code of Corporate Governance and its associated framework and draft improvement plan. This evaluation informs the development of the Council's annual governance statement and the identification of further actions or improvements planned for the coming year. Appendix 1 evidences that we are in a sound position about our governance arrangements, and the areas for improvement are recognised and straightforward. Claire is here, not on Teams, to lead on the report, with Kevin Gallagher, I think, also available on Teams.
Yes, Chair.
And to assist members with any questions. So we proceed to any questions. Mr. Johnson.
Thanks again, Leader. One of the parts of the report talks about early stage legal advice, and I suppose it's what are the implications of action on early stage legal advice? What issues were identified that led to that being a recommendation? So what savings could it make? What savings weren't made because we weren't doing it? And I suppose, how will we be able to measure the improvement by following that recommendation?
The advice I was given by the legal manager, it was more about getting a consistent process put in place to make sure that legal services were involved at the right time, where they could provide optimum input at the right time.
So just to come back to that yourself, Leader, so I think there was a sensible, obviously for that to be a recommendation, it suggests we maybe weren't doing something as well as we maybe could have done. So is there a particular action that we will now put in place to make that good?
Well, it's identified as an improvement action, which would then go into the governance statement and be followed through in the coming year. I should also maybe say that the governance, Code of Corporate Governance, refers back to the previous financial year as well. It's not saying that some of these issues haven't been progressed.
There was a follow-up question. The other question is a slightly different tack, but obviously we're in the COVID-19 period. Has the corporate risk register, is that now being reviewed and updated as a result of that?
I'll pass that one over to Mr. Geraghty.
Thank you, Leader. Hopefully you can hear me. Yes, the corporate risk register refresh is actually on the forward business plan due to come to the next meeting of the committee. We've got a paper together. It's a question of finalising what we want to advise, and we'll take that forward through that meeting.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Anyone? Okay, we'll proceed to the recommendations, which is we consider the evaluation, to agree to the review, and then we have to come back with the annual governance statement. We'll come back to full council with it.
Yeah, the annual governance statement will be actually on the agenda for the 12th of June, but it will then be part of the allotted to the council. Council.
Thanks. Okay, content with that? Item 12 is the distribution of the Dumfries and Galloway Council Fund for the benefit of coastal communities. This report invites members to agree the awards from the Dumfries and Galloway Regional Coastal Benefit Fund. The oversubscription of this fund evidences great plans and ideas that our communities have for the places they live in, and it's important that they are supported to progress their plans, as there is insufficient funding to meet all the good proposals that came to us. And it is, of course, rightly acknowledged in the paper that we will work with the successful applicants in the delivery of their projects, as the COVID-19 will impact in a range of ways the availability of contractors and timescales and so on. Derek Hexel is available on Teams to assist members with any questions. Any questions? Councillor Hislop.
Just for my own information, I read through this rules for applying, etc. It didn't say that you weren't allowed to get the full 100% that you applied for. Why, when there was a sufficient amount in the under £5,000 scheme, did we only award 75 or 50% to applicants?
Yeah, afternoon, leader, afternoon, members. This was based on the scoring framework, so the scoring framework didn't determine, it didn't, the 75% is based on your total overall score, so it's not based on the amount you apply for. There's a number of criteria similar to the area committee discretionary budgets that we then score and the drop-off point where it will 75% recommendation, 50% and so on.
Hey, thanks.
I'm presuming just nobody got more than 75 points, so they weren't actually eligible for the 100%.
That's correct, leader.
Mr. Thompson.
Thanks again, leader. Yeah, it was just actually on the use of the social value assessment tool, and obviously in the last item about corporate governance, it's noted in there. So I'm just wondering what, I suppose the question would be, why wouldn't that tool be used for all applications, rather than distinguish between those under a certain amount and those over a certain amount? Just in terms of consistency, so what some organisation might say, well, there was money left in the pot, why didn't you get money? Why did we get scored differently than another group who might have applied for just slightly more or slightly less, depending on what the threshold is?
Yeah, thanks, leader. The decision of the committee was that the social value tool would be used for applications over 50,000. Given the amount of additional information that is needed within the assessment itself, it was felt appropriate to ask for that additional level of information to those requesting higher value projects. But certainly, if that's something the committee would be interested in going forward, then we can look to streamline that process to carry out social value assessments for all applications.
Well, thank you. I mean, I suppose it's a question of proportionality given the size of organisation and the size of application, but maybe there's principles that the tool could be applied proportionately. I'm not sure, but I'd welcome more information.
I mean, there would be a reason why the Community Committee took that decision. So, not being a member of the committee,
likewise, I'm just conscious of the fact that it was mentioned as a sort of something that was introduced under the last item to do with governance. So I'm just thinking that that's something we should be mindful of going forward.
And it's used for CAT transfers and so on. So. Any further questions? Yes, in Councillor Carruthers. And sorry, first of all, Councillor Scobie, I think, and then Councillor Carruthers. I think. Yes.
I'm still with you.
Good.
Thanks, Chair. Aye, it's really just to ask Derek and maybe even the committee, but out of the eventual 39, there were 42, I think, that applied, as illustrated, are saying 3.9, and we eventually got to 39 that went forward. And of those 39, 18 have been successful, 18 have been awarded something, with Port William being the last one, and they only get a proportion again of what they actually had applied for and had been recommended because the money had run out. My question really is, so that's 19 that haven't received, which is more than those that did. And should any of them, because of COVID or they're unable to deliver on their projects, and the money had to be recycled, would that be then looked at in terms of the others and how they have scored, so that we can get this money used as quickly as possible for the benefit of the communities?
Okay.
Councillor Scobie passing on his technical difficulties to me trying to hit the buttons there. Yes, the money would then be available for this committee or the communities committee, depending on the process, to reinvest. Similarly, but a lot of the officers, the scoring panel, have assessed the applications, given the content of the application that's coming in, that has come in, and there are none that have been recommended for award that we're aware of that would be impacted by the COVID situation. We are proposing within the report to extend the delivery period, obviously aware that we are going to phase our way out of lockdown, so to extend what would normally be a 12-month delivery period, maybe extend that in consultation with the recipients to see to agree an appropriate delivery period. But that's certainly something this committee could decide on if money was to come back in, how that could be reallocated.
Thanks, Derek.
Okay. Councillor Carruthers.
Could you hear me all right?
Hear you now, yeah.
Great, sorry, I was dropping in out of signal, I won't get half of what's been said really, but just a quick one, Derek. So was helping and supporting one of the organisations that were unsuccessful, and I just wondering, is there any opportunity for likes of these organisations later on, if theirs was shovel ready to go, if any of these kind of are slower to go, is there any more funding coming back to this type of project that you're aware of, Derek, please?
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Carruthers. There's certainly support there via the ward officer or third sector Dumfries and Galloway to identify other sources of funding, but we anticipate this is going to be an annual fund as well. We are obviously waiting to hear from the Scottish Government, from the Scottish Crown Estates, on what next year's allocation would be. But certainly if there's the committee can make a decision on if there's money come back in, if we just then move it on to the next applicant who would have received funding if some projects are not able to be delivered. But certainly there's support there from ward officers and our colleagues at third sector Dumfries and Galloway to ensure that those who have not been successful, bear in mind their only recommendations at this stage until this committee makes that decision, that we can support them to try and achieve their outcomes.
Thank you, thanks for that. I'll take that on board. I'll maybe give you a call, Derek. Cheers.
Any further questions? We proceed to the recommendation, which are to agree the projects to be funded from the Coastal Benefit Fund, and also 2.2, which notes the timetable delivery of projects may require to be amended in light of COVID-19. Thank you. 13 is a consultation on the removal of public call boxes. The purpose of this report is to agree the Council's response to a consultation by British Telecom PLC on the future of phone boxes in this area, which have had a low number of calls over the last year, taking into account the views and proposals of local communities. Just to observe that this is an increasingly frequent report. BT used to do this every 4 years and now it's doing it every year. Stephen Wiley is available on Teams to assist members with any questions. Anybody got questions for Stephen? Can I just, something that one of a member of the Labour Group asked about Eskdale Muir. He believed that there had been some objections, local objections to the removal of the call box at Eskdale Muir, but that doesn't seem to have been reflected in our recommendations.
Thank you, Leader. No, we didn't have any formal feedback from Eskdale Muir on that.
Okay, he thought that they put something in, but maybe not. Okay, Rob, Councillor Davidson.
Thanks, Leader. Just to check very quickly, in the appendix, where we have Sandy Hills, that's the second from the top. In the column consent, adopt, reject, where we're saying object pro mobile phone reception, is that our position or simply reflecting the community councils? I agree with the community council, it's definitely an issue in that area. Mobile signal is probably no better than it was way back when I was first elected. Seems to be a real issue there. So I just wanted to check if that's our position. I think it should be, if that's okay. Thank you.
Yep, thank you, Rob. It was the feedback that we did receive from the Community Council, and that's the feedback that's contained within the appendix for this committee to decide whether they agree with that objection or otherwise.
So if I could come back very briefly, Leader, just to say, can I ask the committee to concur with that objection then, please?
Is there anybody else? Any observations? So we have the views of communities. Are we content that those should be reflected in the council's response?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep. Okay. So we just agree that the council's response is that contained in the appendix to the report. Item 14 is the Head of Education, 2 Heads of Service posts which are currently vacant. This report provides information for members to enable them to consider the appointment process for the Head of Education, Quality and Curriculum and the Head of Education, Learning and Resources posts given the COVID-19 pandemic. But it is clear from the recent appointment of the new Head of People and Transformation that the member decision-making aspect can be fulfilled. We are being advised that the candidate assessment process is impacted by COVID-19 restrictions, and so there is a proposal to extend the process. And Paul is available on Teams to answer questions. Councillor Wilson.
Thanks, Leader. We had a bit of a discussion in the Labour Group about this, and actually we probably minded not to have a temporary suspension in the appointment process. Obviously, we've heard about the amount of work that education are going to have to do in the short term. Now, while I appreciate that whatever process we follow, we're probably not going to get appointments in as quickly as possible, but obviously it has been approximately a year that certainly one of these posts has been unfilled, and a number of changes have happened in the meantime, and also there's been a lot of work on education officers, and having these posts filled will probably help with that process longer term. Also as well, I think there's a hearing that there's a number of positions that are similar to this that will appear in other local authorities in the short term would mean that actually we could lose out on some of the best quality candidates. And I think that we have to recognise, and I think it's hit home, particularly with the roadmap that was published yesterday, that whenever we do the assessment centre over the next 12 months, it's going to require some form of social distancing. And the fact that we managed to successfully hold the Head of People and Transformation interviews electronically, I think means that there is a way to do the assessment centre either electronically, or if we only shortlist a handful of candidates, then actually to do it with observant social distancing. The need to do that is not going to go away in the next couple of months, and I think that we would be better to continue the process now and start to think about actually how we will do an assessment centre, either completely electronically or with a small number of candidates observing social distancing. And either this subcommittee or the Employment Appeal Committee could easily meet to do the shortlisting exercise before moving on to the assessment centre.
Okay, well, we weren't quite sure what the problem with the assessment centre actually was, and why there seemed to be no way of getting around that.
Leader, the problem with the assessment centre is it's quite a complex process and required quite a bit of senior management input in order to produce the output reports for members' consideration at final interview. Conducting the final interview process presents no problem, as we've demonstrated with the Head of People and Transformation. However, we would have to have a revised approach there, and perhaps the consideration of using the conventional means by employment appeals, given a number of 20 members involved. At the very least, if it was to go forward, we would have to do that by a smaller subcommittee. There were also a number of issues in terms of candidates leaving their own home base under the framework to attend a physical interview. So again, if it was to go ahead, we would have to look at electronic means as opposed to other methods.
Councillor Davidson.
Thank you, Leader. Like Adam, I think I would like us to look again at the options for how we might be able to do this. I take on board what Mr. Clark is saying. I recognise that our standard process is going to be essentially impossible as matters stand. And I think Adam makes a very fair point that that's likely to be the case for some time to come. But when we were talking at the beginning of the meeting about education and the challenges we're going to face in getting education restarted effectively in the region, I think I would be concerned if we went for an extended period without these posts filled. It may not be the case that we can get successful candidates in place just quite as quickly as I think some of us would like, understanding those pressures that we believe we're facing. But I think I would prefer that we look at this again and maybe consider what the options would be for a substitute process, given that the circumstances won't allow us to do what we're accustomed to in terms of recruitment. Thank you.
But what Councillor Scobie and Councillor Crothers, I maybe bring them in case it's a similar point that they want to make. Councillor Scobie.
I don't think it's a similar point, Chair, but it was just on, and we have received communication from a trade union, and I know that you have replied, as others have, including myself, to that communication, and I don't know if it would relate to this particular post, but it's just on the consultation and that the pool of people that are available, whether they would be available for this post, that they could be given training to fulfil the roles or any vacant posts that do exist. Now, whether it relates to this one, maybe we could get some clarification.
I think the point that Councillor Scobie is referring to is that, as you probably know, the Unison are concerned that we are still continuing to advertise posts externally when there could be individuals in redeployment who could be trained up to fill those posts. I'm not sure that that would actually apply in the case of these posts, however, but yeah, bring in Councillor Crothers.
Thank you, Leader. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Good. I think take a different position to I think Adam, I think it was, and Rob. I think we felt as a group we discussed this, and we thought probably it was actually the recommendations was the right thing to do. That's it. Was it so important at this moment in time we're dealing with all the COVID stuff is to put these people in place? I don't. Maybe that's probably the question. And I'm going back to for you, Paul. I mean, you'll have done a risk assessment. What loss will these not people not being appointed at this moment in time? What loss will that be to the actual delivering the services and education with the model as under the stresses that it's under just right now? And I think that the points that have been raised to all of us as political group leads from I think it's Unison you're saying in particular. I think it's right and it's appropriate. It may or may not apply in this case, but I'd like to know if it did get the reassurance. So that I think the minimum we'd feel comfortable in signing up to going forward today would be to see a further report on how we could actually implement the interview process in these couple of positions.
I'll bring you in because it is actually a different point than the earlier ones.
Sure, I'm not sure that the comment on the Unison was to do with these two particular posts. I'm fairly clear on that. And Gillian, as Director for Skills Education and Learning, has the authority and I think has put interim measures in place that are substituting for the vacancies that exist. As you know, we were unsuccessful in filling the first post, and this is on the second occasion. And just out of, I think there was some inquiries about whether in fact we would lose people. No one has so far withdrawn from the numbers that are in the committee paper that submitted applications by the deadline.
Well, I've got Councillor Maitland.
I think I've asked the question actually online on chat there. It's really a question, it's a much more fundamental question. Do we still need these posts? You know, we've had a massive change since we first thought about them. And I suppose I'm asking the basic question, is this still the right way to go?
I'm not sure there's anybody here to be able to answer that, to be honest.
I can answer that if you wish. These posts were created as part of the current transformation review, and the number of posts in particular was felt to be critical to absorb the amount of work that is within education currently. So I would say that they remain valid.
Councillor Wilson.
I think it's been quite a useful discussion with a number of different points of view. One thing before I go on to make a recommendation, I think we have to bear in mind is that a decision that full council took when we appointed director was to actually make it Director of Skills, Education and Learning. So while it's not just about the education delivery, it's also about that strategic overview on skills, which I think we all agree is going to be extremely important for not just education but the wider economy over the next months and years. And I think that it would be a sensible decision to make sure that the Director of Skills, Education and Learning has the appropriate level of staffing as we implemented last year in order to actually strategically put those plans into place. And I would move that we actually move to the shortlisting exercise and sort of ask that officers draw up proposals as to how an assessment centre could be carried out digitally. Obviously, they won't be able to make concrete plans, it will very much depend on how many of the applicants we actually shortlist, but at least if we start to put those plans in place, then we will be able to carry out an assessment centre in some form at some point in the next month or two.
You have a second?
I was going to say, I think given what we've heard, and given that we've heard that the posts are still required, initially when I looked at this I thought, well, either we do it now or we start all over again having reassessed the COVID thing. Given that we've established that the posts are necessary, I can't see a reason for suspending this other than there's a reason why the process can't happen properly, but I think we have to find a way to allow that process to happen. I wouldn't want to prescribe whether that's digital, virtual, in-person or what, because I'm sure it'll depend as much on the applicants and what's available as well as on the officers and what spaces and officers can be available as well and how they can be available. So I would if Adam is willing, agree that we don't suspend this, but that we find an appropriate way to go through the assessment process so that we can make an appointment. And leave it to officers to sort of determine how that can be done in a safe way.
So that would, yeah.
I mean, as I said, we won't be able to put a firm plan, but at least if we have a number of options developed, then you know, it will also depend on how many people we shortlist, and we won't know that obviously until I imagine it'll be this subcommittee, you know, makes that shortlist.
I think it's a very difficult decision we're being made from being asked to make without actually having the full list of information. Because we might have 15 tremendous candidates there, we might have 15 good enough to do the job, and if we take the decision to carry on, we might miss out on more candidates coming through the process as we come out of lockdown, because restructuring across other councils might free up quality candidates or candidates who want to move out of certain areas to come to look at new jobs. So I think without actually going to see what the shortlisting process is, we don't know whether we should stall it or whether we should go ahead with it. Good idea.
I think that's a valid point, but I think it's important to remember that, you know, certainly the crux of the proposal that I put forward is that we would progress to shortlisting. It's not to suggest that we would complete the whole exercise. As we have done in previous items, we have shortlisted and we have narrowed it down to a number of candidates and we haven't appointed in the end. I think that, you know, that option would still be available to either this committee or the Employment Appeals Committee in future. To do that, I think that, you know, it's progressing to the shortlisting at this point in time that is the most important thing for us.
Yeah, I think we could progress to shortlisting, and then, depending on the quality of the candidates or whether we think that at that point you could decide that we suspended the process or when we'll come back to square one again, because we weren't content with the quality of the candidates. But I think it would, my own view is that I think we should progress to the shortlisting at any rate, and investigate. Alternatively, if we wish to progress beyond that, we need to have an investigation into the methods by which we can fulfil the assessment requirements. Is that you wanting back in, or is that the previous?
Councillor Carruthers wants to come in.
Okay, yeah. Councillor Carruthers.
Thank you, Leader. Cheers. I think the way you've just summed it up is certainly my view. So I would like if Adam and Stephen, if their recommendation, their proposal aligns itself to what you've just said, it's okay. Shortlisting, fine. Absolutely, we get to that stage, but it's how we carry out that process thereafter. Yeah. If we can see a report, some further information in regards to that, I feel comfortable with moving ahead with it. Other than that, I'd feel a bit stubborn and probably put down a motion to stay where we are.
So, are we agreed that we change the recommendation from being a temporary suspension, but to proceeding to the shortlisting of candidates?
Yeah, but also asking officers to
look at the alternatives. To investigate alternative methods of performing the assessment. Is everybody content with that? And Jane and Rob, are you both content with that?
Yes, thank you, Leader.
That's fine. Yep.
Yeah, I'm fine with that in terms of what you summarised.
Thanks very much. Thank you.
Thanks, Leader.
Oh, sorry, Malcolm. Sorry, I missed you. So, thanks, Malcolm. My apologies. Okay. Item 15 is the Town Centre Living Fund. This report seeks members' agreement to allocate £1 million to deliver the 2020-21 Town Centre Living Fund from council tax on second homes income. It also seeks agreement to the priorities and criteria of applications for funding as described in the report. This is a significant investment into key buildings in our towns and villages, and is another example of council investment that will help our region to recover from the economic challenges that COVID-19 has brought. Janie Little is available on Teams to assist members with any questions.
Leader, sorry for interrupting. Can I say something here, please?
Surely, yes.
Thanks. Listen, so I missed it's been quite glitchy for me going back to the comments. It will always be, it's been very solid line up to this meeting, but it's been quite glitchy for me today. So I missed the declaration of interest. So in regards to this fund, it's been agreed. There's a number of funds here. I'd like to declare an interest just in this file. So I'm involved with a project that likely will apply for funding here. But so just so I'm absolutely clear, I haven't applied yet, obviously, because it hasn't been agreed, but a likelihood will. So I'm going to completely stay away from this item altogether. I like it recorded as a declarable interest.
Thanks, Ian.
Thank you. Sorry.
Okay, any questions for Jamie or anything Jamie wants to add to the report?
Thanks, Leader. Nothing further to add to the report.
I think this is very similar to what has gone through communities in previous years in terms of the allocation. So I would imagine there would be anything particularly contentious. So we're happy to agree to the recommendations in regard of the allocation of this £1 million. Right, thank you. Right, item 16 is the licensing matter. We're being asked to consider an application for a late hours catering licence, as it is a request from out with policy hours and therefore cannot be dealt with but via delegated authority. While the decision doesn't need to be made until November, it is appropriate that we make an early determination so that business owners can proceed with their restructure as quickly and smoothly as possible in the interest of the staff and the service. And Caroline Trainer is available on Teams to assist members with any questions. Any questions from members on this?
I think so I think it was more this is really because there's no other mechanism to transfer a licence, because obviously there's an existing arrangement in place, and this is really to replicate that, but with a different applicant. So is that the correct understanding?
Yes, Councillor, that's correct. Unfortunately, the law is quite archaic in this regard, so in relation to this type of licence, there can be no transfer. If there was a transfer permitted, then it would be granted via delegated authority. So unfortunately, a new applicant has to come in to get this licence, and then what would happen is the existing licence holder will therefore submit their licence to us for surrender.
I think on the basis, understanding that and the fact there's no objections, I would probably.
No, I would agree. This is a service that has been available to people using, and it's obviously important service, particularly for people like lorry drivers and so on passing there. It might need refreshment during the night. I'm totally content to agree the application. Anybody not like-minded? Okay, shall we? We agree to grant the application, and if we're minded to it, we have to determine whether we want to grant the hours requested by the applicant. Happy to do that? Grant the hours requested by the applicant?
Yes.
Okay, good. Nobody otherwise minded? Okay, Caroline, you going to summarise what happens now?
Thank you, Chair. So what will happen is, now that you've agreed to grant this licence, thank you very much for considering this application in terms of assisting the business. I will thereafter advise the solicitor in relation to this application that the licence has been granted. So the new licence holder will be Motor Fuel Limited, and the old licence holder, the Malthus Limited, will therefore surrender their licence, and this will enable continuity of the business for food to be sold between 11 p.m. and 5 a.m. 7 days a week. Thank you.
Thank you, Caroline. We proceed to item 17, the application to Castle Douglas Common Good Fund. The purpose of this report is to consider an application to the Castle Douglas Common Good Fund for financial assistance to undertake work on Carling Loch to prevent the growth of blue-green algae. This is actually a complex issue. Our council does not own the loch. In the past, as we had the outdoor education activities on the water, we did preventative work on algae. Appropriate permissions are required from the owner, and SNH do not do any work on the loch. Although it is recognised that due to COVID-19 there are few people around the loch area, nonetheless the applicant is keen to know the outcome of the request for funding, and it's been brought to us for consideration. The views of local members and the community representatives are important here, and in the report it indicates that the chair and the community representative feel that as a maximum 1 year funding could be awarded. Belinda Dolan for the Common Good Interests and Stephen Jack in relation to the previous preventative work are available on Teams to assist members with any questions.
Can I just say, Chair, that Lee Seaton's actually replacing.
Oh, right, okay.
Just to clarify.
Yes, sorry, thanks very much. Okay, have we got any questions? Can I say I did actually, because the actual application wasn't clear about whether it was 1 or 2 years' work, I actually phoned Caroline Yates this morning to find out whether 1 year's, I had been told that this was work over 2 years, and she confirmed that the costs that have been given to us are the costs for 2 applications, which could be done on 2 different years, and that they would be able to, if they were awarded half the sum, they would be able to undertake this year's work. And there was another point of clarification on the section 2 on finance in their application. They've indicated the cost would be 3,501.60, and then later on indicated that they wanted 3,601.60 from the Common Good Fund. Apparently that is a typographical error, and it should actually read 3,401.60 because they actually had this £100 from the project officer work, which would be reduced from that. Okay. Councillor Hislop.
A couple of points. In the body of the report, it states that there's also £500 coming from the B&G Science Festival. Is that to be with taking off the funding that they've asked for? And the other one, they're claiming VAT on the full amount. I've yet to see barley straw that has been sold as other than feeding straw, and feeding straw is VAT exempt. I can't think a farmer would sell it as bedding straw and then charge you VAT on it, because that's a hassle of putting it through his feeding straw. So why is the VAT on that?
Is anybody able to answer that? Because obviously that's the application from the community organisation.
Sorry, Leader, nothing I can add in terms of happily follow up with the organisation and get clarity if you wished.
I think from my conversation with Caroline Yates this morning, the 500 has already been subtracted from the amount of money they're applying for. But although I don't see it in the the application, I don't see it's a subtraction.
Just on that, Leader, it does, the way that sentence reads at 3.1 says the figure is 3,501, however, which implies that subsequent to that 3,501 there's a contribution of £500, so the semantics would suggest the 500 should be, if anything, taken off that.
Is anybody able to answer that? Do we know actually about the 500 came in afterwards? Or?
My understanding is that the £500 came in afterwards. Can you hear me all right?
Could we suggest that if it's half the amount that they require, we agree a funding amount up to that amount, subject to clarification with regard to VAT and with regard to the £500, so that would mean that we have to contribute that in the long.
Would that be unacceptable? We agree to contribute up to half the sum that they're asking for.
Subject to the
clarification about.
Yeah. So that would be for 1 year's funding.
Yeah. That would be effectively 1 year's funding, and Caroline Yates did confirm that they would be able to, that would be acceptable to the organisation, and obviously they'd probably prefer to have it for 2 years, but if there's a problem with the finances of the common good, which I mean, there's nothing here particularly about the finances of the common good, but I understand that there are some concerns about loss of income this year because of there's a loss of rental income due to the COVID-19. So we'll award up to half the sum requested, but subject to the clarification on the £500 contribution? Oh yes, oh, right, Malcolm, sorry. Councillor Johnson.
Fumbling with my buttons there. Just to say, I mean, my interpretation perhaps of the VAT thing is perhaps it's because it relates to the end use of the product. It's like if you take dog food, for example, and you get dog food for your household pet, you pay VAT on it. If it's for a working pet, a working dog, you don't. So maybe that's why the VAT thing has come up. But it's worth clarifying, because quite often with VAT it is as much about the end use as it is actually about the product itself. But as far as this is concerned, I think Ivor's suggestion is perfectly sensible. I agree, funding it up to the level. This work's been going on for years, and it does cause a bit of a kind of health issue and things, as it says in the report. So I think Ivor's suggestion is perfectly sensible.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Malcolm. We can maybe seek clarification on the VAT issue as well, as to why it has been asked for. But I mean, I agree that I feel it's important that the work is done, because it's an asset to the area, and clearly as we come out of the epidemic, we will be hoping for people to come back to Dumfries and Galloway, and it's important that our attractions like the Carling Loch are in a good pristine condition and are not contaminated with blue-green algae. So I certainly feel it's an important piece of work to be done.
Just obviously subject to the conditions of getting appropriate permissions as well.
Yes, yes, because they will have to get the permissions to do it. Yeah. Okay, is that an agreement? So is that clear what our decision is? It's up to half the sum, subject to clarification on the £500 donation, and subject to clarification on the VAT, and also on the necessary permissions to undertake the work. Okay, move on. Item 18 is any other business deemed urgent, and I have no items of business deemed urgent needing a decision today. Then item 19, members are asked to consider the adoption of a resolution to exclude the public from the meeting in terms of section 50A4 and paragraph 6 and 9 of part 1 of schedule A of the Local Government Scotland Act 1973. Are we content to do so for the consideration of the next item?
Just to say, Chair, at this point the webcast will cease as we move into the exempt item of business. So,
and could I say something at this point, Elaine? Which is that I wasn't here for the 2 seconds in which you asked for interests to be declared, and I am declaring an interest in this item now, because I understand that that the purchaser is connected through business with my husband's company.
Okay, yeah, well, we will.
And I'll leave now as well.
Okay, thanks, Jane. We'll note that.